Good morning, ladies and gentlemen from Cape Town and indeed Africa. My name is Tess Pruis. I am the president of SITE Africa. For those who don't know, SITE stands for the Society of Incentive Travel Excellence. And we are here to have a robust discussion about what's happening in our world and in our industry. And with a fantastic team of panelists, and I'd like to introduce my fellow moderators, being Rudy van der Vyver, the former CEO of Saki and currently the CEO of We Are Virtual, and also very kindly running the technical and background for us. So shout out to Rudy over there. A big welcome also to Mr. Sean Mendes, who is our African aviation expert, currently based in Malawi, and looking forward to some really amazing discussions coming from that side. Quick bit of housekeeping. Please have your discussions, your chats, your comments in the chat box, and park your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll just make it easier for us to distinguish between your comments and your questions, but we'll keep an eye out anyway. And please fire away those questions to the panelists. They would love to hear from you. And without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Rudy to start our first discussion and introduce his panel. Rudy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tess, and welcome again. Thank you everyone for joining us. And as Tess mentioned, please do engage with us. This is really meant to be an interactive discussion. We want the audience to have a chat with us, to share your thoughts, ideas as we continue with the discussion. So we're going to kick off today with our first panel, and we're going to really look at a little bit just on some triggers and levers that we can start pulling, some needs that we can identify in the market, and how do we encourage and really bring back intra-Africa business travel with all the benefits that obviously gives us in the industry. Just to introduce my panel quickly, and we are still waiting for Kumbi, and apologies for that. He's just having a few connectivity issues. But on the line at the moment, we've got Tshepiso Maganga, and Tshepiso is from City and Safari in Botswana, and we've got Gillian Blackbeard from Africa's Eden. And I'm going to jump right in. Not to go on the introductions for too long, but rather get into the meaty stuff of the conversation. When we had a bit of a discussion just between the panel and the back end and thought, how are we going to approach today? We thought, let's have a look at some of the largest reasons that drives kind of business travel, or what drives travel. And one of the big elements that I'm sure a lot of our audience and of course our panelists that we discussed was business travel is often a driver for leisure travel. So that's why we thought, let's have a look at how we can really beef up business travel, start that intra-Africa again. And then of course we will have those benefits and those spin-offs that we get from the business travel into leisure travel. And that being said, maybe just a few points that we've highlighted and to kick off the discussion is looking at certain areas, where people are changing behavior. And for example, the way that people, if we looked in January, we had a 300% increase in online searches for virtual team building. Now, what that shows us is that your corporate clients, your employers, they are seeing that their staff are disengaged. They're not part of the team. They are really kind of feeling alone. And at a recent hybrid event that we actually hosted, part of the discussions that people had with the trauma of the change that they've experienced with COVID, not only in their personal lives, but a big point that came out was also, I think, the change in terms of even for an introvert to suddenly not have that interaction with their colleagues, to not be able to bounce frustrations from a work environment off their colleagues, which they traditionally could depend on. Gillian, if I can maybe start with you, just perhaps on your background. I know you've also got a bit of research that you've done in terms of what the need is for people to connect at this stage from a meeting and a getting together perspective.
Sure. I mean, I think that we need to start with the proposition that the world has changed and the world of work has changed. And there was a recent study by Price Waterhouse in the US, which said that during the pandemic, over 83% of employees were now working remotely or hybridly. But the interesting thing was that 87% of those people working hybridly said that they needed to collaborate in order to reach the goals that they were achieving. And so what it's done is, in my feeling, it's opened up an entire new area for the development of mice within our destinations. And I've kind of divided it in two areas. If we're looking at people needing to collaborate, because many people want to work at home, but they do need to see their teams. On one hand, offices are closing. Big offices that people used to go into are closing. So there is no office left to go to. Or during the crisis, there was nowhere you could go to work in a quiet environment. I know that we've seen people saying, I'm not a cat, but there has been this trend of people needing a place to go. So the first one during the pandemic was a follow-on to what the leisure termed as staycation, but it was a staycation working from the hotel. And what we saw was the development of Hilton Workspace, where in New York City, many people who are working from home actually went to the workspace to work. So you had this whole staycation. But more and more people started to be even frustrated about staying in their own city. You know, they've done the staycation, they've worked from home, they've had their animals online. And there was a feeling, especially as you referred to, Rudy, that there's a disengagement and this requirement for team building. And yes, we saw a rise in virtual team building, but I think in order to engage people more, there's going to be a rise in working and doing team building outside of your destination, which for places like Victoria Falls or Kigali or Cape Town, wherever people can go and do team building and engage in actual face-to-face interaction. And later on, we can talk about how that team building diversifies and it becomes a virtuous circle. People are disengaged, they're feeling left out, but they also want to travel for good. So what we're seeing is tourism economies decimated, mice coming back and saying, well, we want to do something meaningful for those areas. So therefore we want to work, and maybe the team building will be a conservation effort or a tree planting or helping vulnerable families. So there's this enormous growth in that team building. And later we can talk about the rise of workation, which is for me, I think, an absolutely enormous possibility for us.
Thank you, Gillian, and fully agree, I think, on that. Tshepiso, from your side, perhaps, in terms of these, I almost want to say the potential for us to get people back into the I want to say the mice activities. What are your thoughts on those levers that could be pulled potentially?
I think where we are, I think we have to recognize where we are as the world at large, that especially for us as Africa, we're sitting on a golden opportunity, right? This topic of inter-Africa travel is not a topic that is new to us, especially if we have been in the destination management or destination marketing sphere. You know that we have been talking inter-Africa travel for quite a while. But the difference now is that this is a golden opportunity that while our international source markets are not traveling, it presents Africa with a golden opportunity to tap onto the inter-Africa travel space. And this is just to say that while our international source markets are not here, it's giving us as African destinations to start traveling within Africa. This is for both mass and leisure. And it's not to say that we are not interested in the international market. We are, but we are saying that let us take this opportunity to build the Africa travel. And I just want to bring this as a case study or as an example in the case of Botswana. Between March last year, March 2020 and May 2020, we're all out of business. A lot of us were completely out of business. And from June onwards, something started happening in Botswana. We started seeing a rise in domestic travel, and at first it came as a shock. It came as a shock both to us as an industry as well as to the travelers, because as an industry, we made a deliberate effort to tap onto the domestic market because the international market was closed. And through this deliberate effort, we started seeing a rise in domestic tourism. And I can tell you that within a short space of time, we managed to get back on business. And here I'm talking leisure travel. And I can tell you that within a short space of time, we managed to generate revenue. I mean, just a little under 1 million, just in a short space of time. And that caused a complete mind shift to say, look, if we can generate this much revenue out of domestic travel, what more of MICE travel? What more if you start moving to the region? What more if we start moving to the rest of Africa? And that is just to say that it is possible to stimulate inter-Africa travel. It just takes a deliberate effort. We have done it on the domestic tourism front as Botswana, and I believe that we can carry out to the rest of Africa. I mean, we can stimulate with the same deliberation or with the same effort. We can carry it out to the rest of Africa to stimulate Africa travel.
Thank you, Tipiso. And I think that makes good sense as well. Kind of start with an area or a region that you can control and manage the perception of your source markets to show, look, we can do this safely. We can control, we can abide by regulations, we can bring meetings back and domestic travel back in a safe manner. So there is no reason that we can't do the same thing for a larger or a more broader source market spectrum. Kumbi, very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, just quickly welcoming Kumbi. I already did a quick introduction, Kumbi, just before you joined, and we are aware that you just had some connectivity issues. And I think that actually bodes well for our drive to bring in-person meetings back, because connectivity only goes that far, especially in Africa. I mean, we do have unique challenges with that they don't necessarily have anywhere else. Kumbi, if I can maybe just, like I said, baptism by fire, seeing as you've joined us, maybe just leading on to the discussion that we're having and what the Tipiso now mentioned in terms of looking at from a regional perspective, bringing those type of, whether it be team building or team development, as we term it these days, whether it be your meetings in a smaller spectrum, but maybe looking at the perceptions around those in-person, whether it be meetings or team buildings or those type of things. From your side, Kumbi, how do we manage the perceptions with corporate clients, our traditional source markets, to make people aware that we can do this in a safe and a regulated manner? What are your thoughts on managing those perceptions with those clients? Oh, it looks like Gillian, can I throw that one to you?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry, my connection's quite bad. I didn't get all of it there, really.
Oh, sorry, Kumbi.
Kumbi, do you want to?
No, it looks like quite a bad lag, but I think you're trying to deal with perceptions around safety, etc., from source markets. I think that's what sort of wobbled through.
Well, I think Kumbi's frozen. Gillian, if you wouldn't mind picking that one up for us.
I think as us here at the destination, that's been quite. Sorry, Gillian, let me try and sort my connection out again, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, I'll take over from Kumbi there. And I think this just goes to show the opportunities and the challenges we have for this type of meetings. And I'm not even going to go into the psychology of Zoom, because there was an article that came out and talked about the psychology and how it's exhausting everybody, primarily because the biggest issue is, why do you feel so exhausted with Zoom? And I thought this is a good insight, and then I'll go back to the opportunities and challenges. But having a meeting like we're having, whether it's a webinar or a team building meeting, it's shown that people communicate this kind of face-to-face, this close to each other, is only reserved for intimacy or battle. So therefore, every day we're having these meetings on Zoom, and you feel like you've either been intimate all day or you've been fighting with somebody all day. So yes, this is one of the reasons why we need to get back to in-person, actual places and working. But coming back to Kumbi's challenge, Kumbi had a challenge logging on. I think it was a power challenge rather than a mobile phone challenge or internet connectivity. He rushed around trying to find a hotel, which shows that there is an opportunity for the hospitality industry to capitalize on this. And I think if we are going to show that we are able to drive MICE business into our destinations, be it within a home country or people traveling regionally or internationally to have meetings, we need to show that we can actually have this technology working 100%. Lags, power cuts, things just not working are a challenge. But yet at the same time, it gives many opportunities. People now can have so many more people in one discussion. You can open it up global. You can collaborate. There's much more possibilities to check out return on investment. You can have follow-up done much easier on a digital platform. So I do think that there's opportunities and challenges. And as a tourism industry, we need to look at that. And it was relatively easy to develop that, as Tsepiso said, for a domestic market. One, the expectation was from a low base. I think we also need to understand that we had a lower base, but if we want to go and bid for very large conferences, we need to start upping our game. But I also think there was a challenge. Our authorities have been somewhat slow in opening up enablers, which I know that the next panel is going to talk about, but just connectivity. The fact that we, for example, in the Kaza region, have the possibility of having a regional hub. It is enshrined in constitution that we can move between the Kaza countries. This isn't even into Africa, but yet we can't have a collaborative, unified entry protocol. I know that Kaza has put forward a protocol. There is a paper, but it hasn't been endorsed by our national governments. And so I think that there's a need for private sector going forward, but there's a need for public sector to move forward as well in order to kickstart these wonderful opportunities that we have.
Thank you, Gillian. And I think that leads us actually nicely on, because I do want to spend some time on what you mentioned with new kind of ways of working, like you mentioned, workations, those type of things. We had traditionally staycations. Now we're seeing people doing this workation type of thing. And funny enough, I mean, we've had quite a few colleagues and friends in South Africa where they were traveling to South Africa. They actually work in England. A lockdown or the borders were closed again in Europe. They couldn't travel back. They continued working here, but they went and kind of did a bit of domestic traveling. So seeing the country. And I think, so leading onto the workation concept, if we can maybe discuss, and Kumbi, let's see if we can get you in on this one. Let's try again. Oh no, we'll try Kumbi on a next one. I'll throw that on to you perhaps. So like I mentioned, with the workations and those type of elements, I think one of the first things is probably the employer's openness or willingness to allow those type of things. What do you see? Are you seeing that there is a potential for that coming out, and that employers are more open to that? I'm going to start with Tsepiso first, and then I'll head over to you, Gillian, for the same comment in terms of your employers and the openness for them to allow people to firstly work from home, travel while they're working, and then potentially look into the workation element. Tsepiso.
I think there's definitely an opportunity in that. I think where we are now, I don't think there's anybody that is not looking at the next opportunity to travel. You know, we have been cooped up at home, and the sooner we get out there. I think what I want to bring forth is that I want to us to think about is that as we think of these concepts like workation, inter-Africa travel, etc., I think it's important for us as well to ask ourselves as Africa destinations that as Africa destinations, are we really interested in Africa as a source market, right? I think if we are interested in Africa as a source market, then we will be able to develop products, or we will be able to develop the African product to be attractive to the African traveler. And that whether it's a leisure traveler, whether it's a mice traveler, I think from there, once we are really interested in Africa as a source market, I think it will really open us all these concepts that, like vacations. We want to get to a place where somebody can comfortably leave Rwanda and say, you know what? I need to get out of here. I want to take my meeting to Botswana, or I want to go on a leisure visit, but combine it with a work trip. And I think as well, we have to get corporates especially onto such discussions. Like I said, that we have to be deliberate in these initiatives. So it's possible. I totally agree with the vacation concept, especially now that travel has been closed and people are looking at the next opportunity to travel. And there's ample of opportunity to travel within Africa itself. I think it's also another opportunity for, I'll give you an example. We recently had a group that wanted to go for a strategy meeting into the Okavango Delta. And the immediate thing they wanted was that, are we going to have a workspace? Are we going to have data projectors? Things like that, And we know that our products are not designed for that type of activities. So again, that presents another opportunity for our suppliers to tap onto this corporate market for vacations. So there's ample of opportunities that we can have a look at. There's ample of opportunities to look at within the African destinations, African continent, really.
Thank you, Tsepiso. Gillian, maybe your thoughts on the workation element, and then Kumbi, I think after Gillian, we can try and get your comments on workations.
Sure. I think there's two elements on workation that we need to look at from a tourism perspective. And your question was, are employers ready to allow workation to take place? And so the big question here from an African perspective is, I do feel that it's a very niche market of African workation travelers. We are dominated not by service industry, we're dominated by government, we're dominated by other industries that aren't able to do a workation. So I think that is a consideration. And yes, as Tsepiso says, corporates are extraordinarily important to drive that. There is still an opportunity for intra-African workation, but at the same time, I do think it's somewhat limited because African employers are not ready to allow most of their workforce to work from anywhere. What I see as a big potential is workation for Africa from international markets, people who are working specifically in service industries that are enabled to work anywhere. And there's an attractiveness to come on your workation to Africa. One, we can talk about the safe protocols. COVID has given us an opportunity to positively portray Africa as a safe destination. We've looked at low COVID rates. You've got mass vaccinations. Vic Falls has now reached herd immunity. Our area and spaces are wide open spaces, and there's that link of you do good. If you put that together with things like the lower cost, obviously, if you're coming with a US dollar or a British pound or a euro, it's much cheaper to do your workation in Africa than to do it in New York City. So there is a relatively cost-effective way to work on your workation. So yes, I think those employers are more open to it, but Africans need to take up the mantle and say we can do it. because nobody's going to take the risk to travel to Africa to do their workation unless they're very big on travel, until we've proved that we can do it. And I think there are a few other barriers. We've talked about barriers in coming into countries, your COVID tests, etc. But there's also barriers if you're going to stay for a little bit longer. Are there work permit issues? Are there issues in exchange rate currencies? Are there issues on staying for a long time, etc., etc.? So we need to work with public sectors to make sure people are ready to host this. It's not going away. It's just going to increase. And I really did try and find statistics on digital nomads. How many digital nomads are there? And we haven't quite got that yet in all but it is increasing, and it is a trend that's going to happen.
Thank you, Gillian. And I think with digital nomads, if we just look at, and I think we often think of, and it's just a natural thing, we kind of think of our traditional way of doing things and the way that we used to and what we like. But I think with the younger generations coming up, I mean, you've got your vloggers, your bloggers, your YouTubers, and all kind of other and I mean, there's a lot of people that and younger people that look up to them. I mean, they're celebrities in the spaces, and a lot of them, all they do is they travel the world while working, and they post these beautiful images and videos of where they're traveling. So I think that is, for us, it's something very different. But for the millennials, the Gen Zs, the workation, and that's something that they almost idolize. They all want that. They all want to kind of get to that. So I think that could also be a bit of a leading indicator or a leading driver even for that coming in more and more. But obviously, as you mentioned, I think there's quite a few elements that hinges on. So, for example, your connectivity. What are those enablers that we need? And I think just before we get to those, I just see here on the comment section, Tess is asking Gillian, what can private sector do to encourage policymakers for the harmonizing of protocols, especially within neighboring regions like Vic Falls?
And this is something we're working from Africa's Eden. We are getting all of our private sector members to endorse these positive protocols. But I think endorsement is empty words. I think private sector needs to collaborate to show true and quantifiable data. If you're just speaking and not actually showing the potential of demand and the actual demand, it's just words. But for example, why we feel it's so important in CASA, which, to give you an example, employs over 2 million people. That's 2 million people who are 98% employed in tourism industry across 4 countries. With the downturn, absolute crisis of tourism under COVID, we need to, as private sector, show this is why we need it. And it's not just livelihoods for tourism. It's keeping families alive. It's keeping conservation alive. And private sector needs to stop complaining. I'm going to be very, very frank and say that government doesn't listen to us, and show where we need help, show why we need help, and show what our tourism sector is for the greater economy. If we can't do that and work collaboratively to put out that data and to come together and have one voice, then it's a lot of noise. And you can't expect change to happen that way. So I do think that this is going to happen. I think that we need to have strong voices, and we need to speak from an area of importance where we can show what demand and what growth actually does for the sector. Because you need to weigh it across security and safety issues. You need to weigh it across health issues. We need to show why tourism must grow, and this is why.
Thank you, Gillian. I saw Tepisa also just froze there, so I think she might still be struggling with some connectivity issues. But I think let's continue a little bit further in terms of, and especially digging down, I think a bit more in the workation concept. I think that is something that we can really drive home a bit. Sorry, I just see that there's another comment here. I just like to engage our virtual audience a bit so that we don't just go off on a tangent and actually just get some answers here. Gillian, I'm losing you. Oh, sorry. Looks like we've lost Gillian as well. Tess, can I maybe ask you to just come back on and we can just quickly continue a bit of a discussion so that I don't talk alone?
Rudy, man alone.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Fascinating discussion. Absolutely. So,
sorry, Tess. I just want to say, like, again, it just shows us, especially with our environment in Africa. Here we go. Yeah, Jilly's coming back on. But it just shows us with our environment in Africa, even especially if we want to, in this time, try and promote that regional kind of hubs in terms of meetings and those type, we still do need our venues and our MICE, I want to say our traditional MICE establishments, to look at those connectivity elements, because I think that is a big driver. Gillian, as you mentioned, if we can perhaps look at how do we reestablish intra-Africa travel, and as we mentioned in our pre-talk, having regional kind of travel, domestic travel within, say, South Africa. You've got an office in South Africa, you get staff to travel to Johannesburg for a meeting, but you link up with your office in Addis Ababa or somewhere, but you get them to travel regionally or domestically to that hub and linking those two up. And I think that could potentially be a driver to get people back to our venues, if our venues can have that connectivity and those type of things in place.
Sure. I mean, and that's kind of like taking a step-by-step approach, Rudy. You're not saying everybody must travel and do a workation immediately, we're ready, because I think that the markets and our demand has to show that we can do this bit by bit. So we're creating confidence in meetings. And what I see with your concept is, so everybody say you have a large bank that works intra-Africally, and they need to have an Africa meeting rather than everyone coming together in one destination, which would be wonderful. We want that, but we might not be ready. You can have regional teams within that bank come together. So the Southern African or South African meet in Joburg, the Southern African meet somewhere, the East African meet somewhere. And then they connect virtually. So there's that, and it goes on, and I think we can move to almost a hybrid event type of proposition where you are having some people in person, some people meeting virtually. And I think just showing all of these difficulties with connection, one of the things that we've seen in the global trends is this rise in workspace. So it might be in a hospitality area, but it also might be independent workspaces. Things like WeWork are big trends across the US where people can go in, they hire that workspace for that time. And I think that this has a much wider ranging possibility, not just for hospitality, but for estate agents. How do you develop city spaces now? There is less demand for office space, but more demand for virtual workspaces. So it becomes a really interesting mix. So yeah, I do believe that that's a way forward. And when we were talking about it, you were talking about, well, how do we get people confident? And Rudy, you were talking about, well, first of all, there's two things: power and internet. And I think there's going to be a lot of investment in power trucks and internet trucks. So maybe you'll want to talk about what your organization was doing to give that security.
Oh, thank you, Gillian. And 100%. And I think connectivity, unfortunately, comes at a cost, because basically what it is risk mitigation. And I think us in the MICE industry, I mean, we well aware that you can guarantee a lot of things, but all of those guarantees come with almost insurance policy costs in the back end. So, for example, what we do for our clients, and especially in the veterinarian space, the clients, they do not like city hotels. They always want a lodge somewhere out in the bundus. They're outside people. But now they've started to also embrace the hybrid meeting concept. And what we actually do is we partner up with television broadcasting infrastructure, the same way as they would send out a live broadcast for let's call it a kayak race, down the river, doing something on the Zambezi or whatever, and they want to stream that. That's basically a satellite link up. So you can create internet or connectivity infrastructure anywhere for a client, literally anywhere, via satellite link ups, but that comes at a cost. And I think that leads on to your earlier point, Gillian, is we need to show the value for the client. And that's what we always do, is we try and shy away from cost discussions with our clients and try and have value discussions. Yes, this does cost you an additional, say, 40,000 Rand, 50,000 Rand to guarantee that. But what is the value that we create? Because of the content that we can guarantee that will be shared, because of a professional brand identity that's being shown to your clients who are all online for the event, if it's a client-facing event. And of course, the thing is, if you are investing, and I'm just using rough figures, if you are paying 100,000 Rand for an online virtual hybrid type of meeting with your audience, but half of your audience can't connect, or they can't hear what the content is that's being shared, you've wasted that 100,000 Rand. If you pay 140,000 Rand because you've paid for that satellite link up, the security of connection, you get 140,000 plus Rands worth of value, because the meeting could actually successfully take place. That engagement could be created. And I think that is one of the most important things for us in meetings. And similar here, I mean, we always try and keep an eye on our virtual audience, on the discussion boards. We encourage them to talk, because meetings are about engagement. If we had all the answers, or we had all the knowledge ourselves, we would just do things on our own. We wouldn't have to meet. We wouldn't have to get together and brainstorm and those type of things. So I think 100% to your earlier point, it is, we need to, as private sector, we need to get our value proposition right in our heads. We need to collaborate. And I think that's also, maybe just in closing that thought, that is definitely a big thing that we've had to do with our hybrid and virtual events. Your hybrid event team is a lot larger than your traditional just in-person team. And you need to I was going to say, you need to communicate that with your clients. They need to understand the complexities behind the event, so that they can provide adequate budget, provide adequate support, but also know what the potential risks are and why we need to manage those risks. And I think just... Sorry, Gillian, go ahead.
Can I just add that there is a value proposition even further than that? When we're creating this value proposition to your clients, why do they need to do hybrid events, or why do they need to embrace these things? Yes, there's the proposition for backing everything up, having clear internet and power, but there's two reasons why value is so much higher in this new way of doing business. One is, when you're online or you're doing a hybrid event, the return on investment is huge. Let's talk about the travel show industry. So what we found, we've done virtual and we've done in destination. And I think that, yes, in destination, we've said that that's important, but virtual allows you to reach so many more people. So for the travel industry, how do we engage this enormous change and shift into more independent travel agents, smaller agents that are working independently? You know, you've got about, I guess, about 47,000 independent travel agents who sell Africa, but you can never engage them in destination. But virtually you can. So there's that one. And just what we talked about, and I feel so important, corporates are looking at greening. They're looking at giving back. They want to move to a more sustainable meeting, incentives, conferencing scenario. And the hybrid events, when you bring in virtual, everything is done digitally, is more sustainable. And there was already a trend. People don't want to go and build huge, unsustainable stalls and stands when you can do it digitally. Yet they still want in person. So it's a changing narrative for the meetings and incentive industry.
Tess, and just seeing as I've lost half my panel, if I can maybe just throw a sideline, because we're very focused on the meeting type, and I think we haven't really discussed the incentive side as much. Do you perhaps, and completely off the cuff, I mean, please excuse me for putting you under in the crosshairs here now, but just kind of following the same kind of thinking in terms of team development, those type of things. Or what are the elements of incentive travel that we can, as a low-hanging fruit, start looking at, and as a collective start putting that proactively to our clients and saying, here's a safe way and an effective way that we can look at bringing incentive travel back?
Good question, Rudy, and indeed an important one. Incentive travel is what it's been shown to be the biggest motivational driver for performance and staff retention, a number of other good things. Doing a virtual incentive trip, not quite the same thing. So what role does digital play in incentives? I'll leave that for the later discussion. But I'd like to go back to a point that Gillian touched on earlier, which is critical, and that is the trust factor. As much as people need to go on those incentive trips, connect, bond, do all these good things that incentives do, if the boss does not feel confident that his people are going to be safe, that they're not going to get stuck in quarantine, not end up on a red list, everything that's affecting us right now, it is a challenge. So I think the big question is, how do we regain that confidence? But also, how do we get a bit more creative? And I love what Tsepiso said earlier, is start domestically. And Robin, I see, have come up with a few brilliant comments. Robin, I know you might not have done hair and makeup, but if you want to join the chat, Rudy, maybe you can press the button there. Move away from the traditional glitz and glamour incentive trips, and I'll touch on that a bit later as well, is, the narrative has changed to travel with a purpose. So, the glitz and the glamour is now less important than immersing yourself into a destination and having real authentic experiences. And Africa lends itself to that, because my motto has been, social distancing is not optional, it's a way of life. And Africa can do that so well, because we've got smaller boutique hotels, villa-type setups, small bush lodges that you can book out exclusively, and then have that sense of safety and security for your group, because you do not have to interact with masses in bars and streets and restaurants and those good things. So that's kind of my nutshell take on it.
Yeah.
No, 100%, Tess. And I think that is, funny enough, now a different challenge that is arising for your in-city hotels, where now people are looking, and your corporates are looking to a wider open spaces. And again here, yes, it's a challenge, but maybe an opportunity for our city hotels to partner up and collaborate with spaces, with parks and those type of things. Using the city's infrastructure and elements that are available to still pull people in, but get those more open spaces available for them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Then I think just a last one. Sorry, Tess, I'm just keeping us on the cameras. Just a last one. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, Gillian. Just with the.
Yep.
I think let's focus a little bit on those enablers that we were talking about. So we've got some ideas that are floating around. We're talking a lot about collaboration. Like I said, we do see the need for clients having the need for creating engagement again. There is a need for people meeting again. People feel disengaged. So there's definitely a few value elements that we can pull in, that we can get together to put a value proposition out towards clients. But what are those other elements that we need other sectors or regulatory bodies to also come on board with, for us to really get things off the ground? Regulations, vaccinations, those type of elements, Gillian?
Sure, and there's so many. There's both micro and macro enablers. Let's start with the larger ones. We've talked about entry protocols, whether it's a protocol in COVID times to show that you're vaccinated or you've had a PCR test. There's entry protocols, visas, work permits that enable that. That was pre-COVID. And another huge one is access. And as things start up, we, especially from the MICE industry, whether it's a meeting or an incentive, has an even larger challenge to restart post-COVID. Leisure tourists can leave when they want. There's not a set time that they have to arrive. And so the decrease that we've seen in the aviation industry, a lot of airlines either are not flying to the destination, airlines have closed down, airlines are not flying. So we in Africa had this enormous issue of connectivity and access already pre-COVID. Africa, the World Bank estimates that traveling intra-Africa is at least 50% more costly than the rest of the world. That's if you can even get there. Out of the 5 African hubs, 3 are not even in Africa. So Africa already had an enormous challenge with access, which was huge. And that was why we saw so few larger meetings come to Africa. We had a few hubs, but that was it. Roll on COVID, and those airlines aren't even flying. Yes, Ethiopian has been absolutely awesome staying flying, but it's not always the long haul. And if we're talking about regional and domestic, we're thinking about regional and domestic airline capability. A lot of those airlines are not flying. If they are flying, they're flying smaller aircrafts. If they are flying smaller aircrafts, there's a higher cost. If the loads aren't there, they don't fly. So this area of access, which I know another team are going to talk about, is enormous if we are going to create safe and secure and positive travel within our industry. So airlines have a role to play. I do think specifically on the incentive side, there has been a little trend that I've been watching, incentive and leisure in access, is the rise in smaller charter services or smaller independent airlines that are creating scheduled flights, like the MAC flight that's going from Victoria Falls to Kasane. So now you can maybe conference in Victoria Falls where it's larger and then fly over to Kasane to do your post trip. So those are factors that I really think we need to look at and work with. Again, we can't expect airlines to start building routes if the tourism industry sits in its own little silo and says we need routes, but doesn't help give the demand data. If we sit in silos, how is an airline going to develop a route if they don't know what the market is? So there's a big drive towards this. Those are some of the larger factors. Micro factors is looking at our products, and Tepiso touched on this. How is our hospitality and tourism industry ready for virtual travel, workation, MICE, virtual shows? Is the physical setup the setup that needs to be to grow and create safe environments? Do we have the facilities to do this? And it was a discussion pre-COVID, and now it's more and more a discussion post-COVID. And it is. It's a unified position that we need to say we're ready, we can do this, and working one-on-one with corporates. These kind of talks are good. We're putting it out there. And we can't, as Africa, anymore say, well, it's Africa. We don't do what the rest of the world does because it's Africa and we're so behind. No, we can do exactly what they're doing in the States. We can do exactly what they're doing in Europe. We are better positioned for this. So I am a big proponent to say, come on, guys, let's get going. I was going to use a very rude word, but you know what I'm going to say? Let's get going. Let's speak. Let's do. Let's stop sitting in silos. Let's show demand. Let's create the atmospheres. Let's create the enabling environments, and let's get on with it. It's one of the things that I say most when I talk about tourism. Africa only gets 3.2% of global tourism revenue. Just 1% more, which could come from incentives, it could come from meetings. 1% more accounts for 1.68 billion US dollars of revenue to the African economy. Just 1% more, or 250,000 jobs. And we're sitting here saying, well, we don't know what to do. No, we do know what to do. And I think that the opportunities are enormous.
Couldn't agree more, Gillian. And I love your attitude about just get going. I mean, because otherwise it's, what's that term? Analysis paralysis. We keep on thinking about what are the plans and we look at what everyone else is doing. And I couldn't agree with you more on, we can do things as good as any international company, if a country, if not better. And to your point,
Yeah.
I think, and also leading on to Tepiso's earlier point of starting locally. So if we look at Intra-Africa, for example, and just leading on to those enablers, one of the things we mentioned and also spoke about earlier is an employer's kind of fear of their guys getting stuck, or even personal people getting that fear of, oh, but what if they close? And what we've seen is that the borders Intra-Africa is at the moment a lot more stable, if I can call it that, than it is traveling for us to Europe or for Europeans traveling here. So I think, again, a good value proposition and a reason for us to say, let's start promoting the Intra-Africa, because that is something that is much more within our control. And we can move people a lot easier in terms of, even if there is a hard lockdown, repatriation is a lot easier Intra-Africa than it is often from your other international countries. So I think it's really a good kick up the bum for us to say, like you said, I'm also using the same
yeah, I wasn't going there, but and I think we also need to think about cost, Rudy and Tess. I think let's be realistic. COVID has shrunk the global economy. We are going to have a recession that hasn't been seen before since the 1920s and 30s. Global recession is going to hit everybody hard. Corporate budgets have been slashed, and if they are going to have meetings, they're going to look at how do we save money yet still achieve the same goals. Intra-African travel, domestic travel, those kind of cost discussions are going to be huge when we're looking at the development of MICE and meetings and incentives intra-Africanly. It's certainly far cheaper to go across the border from South Africa to Botswana, or from Rwanda to Nairobi, etc., than to go somewhere else. So cost is going to be a massive factor. We spoke about exchange rates. So international coming into Africa, our exchange rates are so much better and more conducive for that. But within our own traveling, it's become more cost effective. And we always talked about how business leads leisure, but in a way, some leisure travel has allowed corporates to now think about conferencing in Africa. So I had clients from one of my members who said, well, one of the top corporates went to travel on a leisure vacation somewhere domestically. And he was very happy with that experience that he had. So that corporate now, after his leisure travel, now wants to do an incentive in that domestic market. So for the first time, we're seeing leisure sometimes even driving MICE, which never really happened before.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've actually seen is incentive travel driving meetings, because I've personally, we've had quite a few corporate clients that they've booked an incentive trip there, went to the resort or the hotels as they went through their trip, and some of your guys that plan the meetings, your leadership in the company, actually saw the hotel and, oh, well, this is brilliant. I mean, we should have meetings and additional engagements there in partnership with the incentive travel. And once again, I think the big thing is getting maximum value out of both your incentive travel as well as your meetings. And if I can maybe just close off, we've got about 5 minutes left, Gillian. Just as a final thought, I think we've touched on all of these elements in what are the enablers. I know the panelists coming up are going to dig into the air travel aspect and those type of elements a bit more. But I think just one thing that we can maybe close off, and I kind of feel this is a good note, is to just touch on that sustainability element again. You mentioned that less with virtual events, we've got less printed materials and those type of things. But I mean, with hybrid events, yes, now people are coming back in that. But I just thought, seeing as we're creating something new, it is, and I don't think we need to just adapt. I think there's a few niche segments that are coming out within the MICE industry now. Virtual is not the death of in-person in our view. Virtual has its place. For those clients that could traditionally never have a meeting, now meetings are coming are within their budget scope. They can actually do something now and get teams together. Your in-person events will come back, maybe in a slightly different format, but they are already coming back. And then, of course, hybrid has become very, very attractive. But I think each one has an objective that it will achieve, and it needs to be functional. But saying all of that, so instead of just adapting, I think we've got the opportunity to now create new ways of doing things in new segments. And Gillian, from your side, don't you believe as well that rather than, I think sustainability's kind of been put on the back burner for a lot of us, but isn't this the ideal opportunity to create these new segments with sustainability at the core of them?
100%. And when we were chatting, I was saying, goodness me, COVID happened and the discussions that we had on sustainability seem to have gone out the window. And I truly believe if you're creating something new, you are enabling yourself the opportunity to do it better. And so when we're looking at kickstarting the MICE economy, when we're kickstarting these new incentives, we should be thinking sustainability at the core. I actually sometimes think that we should, yes, COVID is a challenge, but let's continue with how do we make these more sustainable for the corporates, more sustainable for the global environment, and more sustainable for the destination. And that means, as you said, the event runs sustainably. So there's less printed material, less carbon emissions. They're choosing venues that have a good sustainable track record. But also people want to give back. And Tess talked about authentic experiences. There's so much opportunity to hybrid straight corporate events with something a little bit more touchy-feely, but to be meaningful for the destination and meaningful for those people who are doing that event. And so when we go out and we think about how are we going to talk about this new trend post-COVID, sustainability needs to be at the core. And it comes full circle. There's a lot of people who believe that COVID is ultimately the result of us not treating the world the way it should be. And it's time that we do use that. It's a warning sign to say, well, let's do things differently. We're not saying stop meetings. We're not saying stop travel. We want to say that travel needs to be good, and it needs to be good for the guest and for the destination and for the world. And there's so many more things. The reality is that we can reach so many more people. We can communicate better. We listen more. And so that's a core factor in the new MICE industry. Oh, I'm talking about the new MICE industry, but yeah, in the new industry post-COVID.
I think, and I think it's actually a good way to term it. It's not just adapting for the short term. It is something new. We are scaling ourselves up, and especially as Africa as well, Gillian. Like you said, let's be confident, and we've got all the reasons to be confident. So let's scale ourselves up. And I think maybe as a closing, just some of the major elements that I jotted down that's come out of our talk. It's collaboration. I think it's time for us as an industry and it's been time for far too long, to get together, stand together, and look at those value propositions. Putting together a value proposition that we can really take to market, but also like through that collaboration, pull in all the stakeholders, all those enablers that we need to work together to really put Africa on the map. And then I think as a final one, it's that kick up the bum. The time is now. We need to, what carpe diem, seize the day. Tess,
yes, exactly.
I think that's the end of our session. Tess, I'm going to hand back over to you. Seeing as you are, no, you're doing the last panel, but I'm going to hand back to you, Tess.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Gillian and Kumbi and Tepiso in their absence. It was really robust and I think very important discussion. And you certainly have brought up some food for thought. And I think some of it has not really been highlighted before. So well done and thank you for that. So let's do that kick in the butt and get people thinking about it, but also doing something about it. So well done and thank you very much. So from here, we are going into another very exciting discussion. And it's a topic that us general public don't always get, and that's the question of aviation. How does it really work? Why can't we just fly from Joburg to Addis? It doesn't quite work like that. And to unpack some of the complexities and opportunities within the aviation sector, specifically within Africa, leading the pack here is Mr. Sean Mendes, as I introduced before, from based in Malawi, but a total African aviation expert. Welcome, Sean, and thank you so much for joining us. And please introduce your panel. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody from, well, it was sunny when we started the discussion. It's getting a bit overcast right now, Malawi. I'm Sean Mendes. I'm in Blantyre, and joining me on my panel today are David King and Sean Bradley, who are both down in South Africa. David is with Wescrow, which is the the model aviation route development agency, I'd say, which is a very strong partnership, private-public partnership to develop new aviation routes in Cape Town. And Sean Bradley is the with Travel Wings, which is again one of the. Well, I'll let them jump in and explain their their affiliations a bit better. So, David, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Sean, thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm based within Wescrow, the Western Cape Trade, Tourism and Investment Promotion Agency. And I'm the project manager for a project called Cape Town Air Access. So we are tasked with doing route development for Cape Town and the Western Cape. And yes, we've been quite successful up to now, well, up to 2019, I would say, just before COVID hit. But yeah, we've established 19 new routes and 23 route expansions for Cape Town International Airport. So that brought a lot of economic opportunity into the city and the province. And yeah, we trying to keep going during this time.
Excellent. And, you know, hopefully things will rebound well enough. In fact, that's going to be the topic of our discussion, is the rebound. Sean Bradley, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your background and affiliations?
Thank you very much, Sean. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. My background is mostly airlines, and probably the most recent chapter, well, just over a year ago, was with Qatar Airways based in Doha. I've been involved with BASA, the Board of Airline Representatives, representing some 32 of the leading brands here in South Africa. That has somewhat dwindled down in terms of operating airlines right now based on the circumstances. And my current chapter is with Travel Wings. We're an OTA, global, pretty strong in some of the core markets in Africa, namely Nigeria, Ghana. And we also saw expansion, some 19 new markets that actually opened up in 2020. And we form part of the Satguru Travel Group. So thank you for this opportunity.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sean and David. And I think, you know, from the introductions, it's going to lead me into the first question on this, which is, where does African aviation stand today in the post-COVID recovery process? I mean, we've seen that from a statistics perspective that African aviation, for example, seems to have reduced by about 65% in 2021 ongoing statistics relative to 2019, while most other regions seem to have reduced between 70 to 90%. And that's, you know, looking at Europe, Australasia, Asia, Pacific, Latin America, and so forth. Yet it seems that in Africa, our connectivity problems continue to be there. How do you think African aviation in particular is doing with the recovery? David, let's see what your thoughts are as a route development person.
I think it's, you know, we can look at it from the airlines perspective, and my experience up to now has been that the airlines are, you know, almost over optimistic. They really, you know, they're really focused on reestablishing connections, you know, to all the destinations they served before COVID. And in our discussions with the airlines, you know, all of them, especially for Cape Town, I want to come back to Cape Town as soon as possible. In intra-Africa, I know the situation is a bit different where, you know, as you know, from a start, there wasn't maybe that much connectivity to start with. And we know that's always been an issue, you know, within Africa. But I also feel that there are airlines that are performing very well in this situation. I mean, if we think about Ethiopian Airlines, even during COVID, pivoting and focusing on cargo, while there was a lot of passenger restrictions. And they're slowly building back their network. And I think they are a shining example of how to do it during this time. If we're looking at African Airlines, more locally, I can also think of Airlink. They've just grabbed the opportunity and they are really expanding their network within the region. And that's also a great way of doing this. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but I think we've got a long way to go, and especially focusing on inter-Africa is going to be challenging.
No, I think that is true. There are definitely some airlines which have viewed this more of an opportunity, certainly a challenging opportunity, but an opportunity by which they could increase their presence within the African markets, either during the pandemic or immediately in the rebound from the pandemic. Sean, what have you seen with your interactions with multiple airlines during the pandemic and now again in the recovery phase?
So, Sean, it's a few things here, and I think the fact that I've moved, from an airline portfolio effectively into OTA and operating from a different sales channel perspective, having discussions with multiple airlines, there's a line of commonality that actually comes through with all of this there. There's a few actually, but certainly the one on here is, though we try and remain in this zone of optimism, the reality is the fluid situation that we're all faced with on a daily basis in terms of regulations, in terms of changes, government policies, border closures, etc. So, many of the airlines have also moved into a space, and as COVID, and probably within that first quarter of COVID actually hitting in 2020, have also moved into a space there where they very quickly established departments that are completely focused in terms of what government regulations are, working within those regulations, understanding it, and understanding what all the barriers of entry really are. And then, that kind of filters through the whole commercial unit of the airline in terms of resizing, routes, all the strategic components in terms of trying to reduce cost factors, etc. So what have we actually seen from an airline perspective? Dave just mentioned that in terms of Ethiopian, Kenya Airways, there's a lot of optimism. I'm not even talking Middle East carriers at the moment. In terms of Qatar Airways, its progressive approach to the market generally. We're seeing airlines, the likes of Ethiopian, for example, that has operated through the COVID period, but there's been a shift in their business to a degree as well. If we go and take Ethiopian, for example, that's been proactive and has actually gone and changed several of their aircraft to actually accommodate cargo loads. And if anything has accelerated during this time there, it's been the transportation of goods, and especially through Africa, where suddenly, the kind of shopping, the trips that people were doing and stuff going into South Africa, for example, or other key markets within Africa, was suddenly not at their disposal. And a big dependency in terms of this cargo actually coming into it there. So I think the cargo uplift has been a benefit and been a survival area for some of the airlines. But if we just take what I think it was around, it was mentioned by IATA as well, around 54 million passengers that flew by plane in 2020, which is literally half of what was previously experienced in 2019. So, it's down probably about $8 billion. And we got to ask ourselves here, at what point do we then start reaching anything remotely near what those 2019 numbers are when we actually consider the economic impact around travelers? So our discussions with airlines there is, when I say challenging, it's challenging in terms of us not knowing what the future really looks like, because there's optimism to build the routes, and as soon as some of those routes start and there's some changes in regulation. So we're really at the mercy of governments.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, is that one of the biggest challenges then, and it may be interesting from your perspectives also to hear with this, is the ability to communicate quickly and effectively the current status. And I think, being able to get the right information out to the stakeholders, both within Africa, in different countries within Africa, as well as to external aviation stakeholders, to the airlines, to the governments, and so forth, outside of Africa, is part of the challenge. And is that something that you all have seen as well, that governments or other stakeholders are not necessarily getting the information out? It may just be a memo that is issued by a government agency, but it's not something that is getting to the people that need to know about it. Dave, what have you seen in that respect? With South Africa's border closures and so forth, have your external stakeholders outside of South Africa been aware of what lockdown 1, 2, 3, 4 means for them and so forth?
Yeah, I think there was so much confusion at the start, and no one really knew what they were doing. I would honestly say, I think everyone was just trying to navigate, the mess that that started in 2020, and I think that created a lot of confusion with messaging, not even just to the outside world, but even within the country. I mean, there was a lot of, I'm sure there's other African countries that had the same issues with even citizens not knowing what's going on at some point. So, so my opinion is that the messaging is probably not as clear as it could have been, especially when we started also implementing, rules for different countries, similar to what the UK is doing now. I think it just creates a lot of confusion when traveling. Are you on, what list are you on? Red, amber, green? What do you need to do when you travel? What do which kind of documents do you need? Which kinds of tests do you need? So I think there is still a lack of clear messaging. If I have to say now, let's say I want to, out of the top of my head, travel to any country in Africa, I would first have to go and research quite significantly what's needed before I can go. It's not clear,
And Sean, what about you? Is this something that various airline stakeholders that you interact with have put forward as a challenge?
Sean, so from our perspective, I'm talking in the OTA space now, just trying to gain traction, bringing the brand into South Africa, though we established in Nigeria, Ghana, other markets. The challenge that the airlines are also facing in terms of what we want to communicate through to customers on the website, in terms of the requirements when traveling, PCR testing, etc., is, many of the airlines, as they receive updates in terms of red list, any of those changes, they obviously updating their websites, and we've got this information. So it's this information overload. And if we just put ourselves in the shoe of a consumer who's busy shopping, and with so much having moved online, doing their price comparisons, and let's admit it, OTAs are also being used to look at the price points, visiting the airline websites, then trying to get information, then going to the departments of health, Center of Disease Control, all trying to pull together what is the relevant information for that particular country. And no sooner have you got on top of that information, then there could be some changes and things that's come with it. Then it's quarantine policies. And then which country were you in the last 10 or 14 days that you may have traveled through there? So, when you take all of that information, try and make sense of it, and then still trying to deliberate whether you're actually going to take an international flight, it's an enormous amount of insight that needs to be actually gained from that. So without doing a sales pitch on our side, I mean, we moved from on our website there, we've actually gone and introduced a PCR service, and working with particular laboratories here in South Africa to try and ease that pain for potential travelers when traveling regionally or internationally, there to try and have that information readily available. And I think, if we were to look into, just stay in the solution mode in terms of what can countries do more, what can Africa do more that is on the back foot in terms of this regulus thing, in terms of the name that is so incorrectly used again with a variant, is there could probably be greater collaboration in terms of how do we give a centralized area of information that helps the entire industry and helps the consumer at the end of the day.
No, I think you've really summed that up well. I think that to use the term that I used yesterday during our chat was that the perception of brand Africa seems to have taken a hit due to the so-called variants and the branding that has been applied to by the international media, and that seems to be something that has. Well, it's definitely, for example, I think Cape Town has seen, deferral of two of their very key North American routes as a result of travel bans and, red lists and quarantine policies. Do we see this as something that potentially could last through the rest of 2021? What is our optimistic and realistic scenarios on this, Dave? What is Cape Town looking at in terms of when the US carriers might be coming back?
Yeah, I think we are trying to remain optimistic. We obviously have our own route development ideas that we are trying to implement, and through our discussions with the airlines, as I said, they are all optimistic, and most of them are targeting summer return, IATA winter return, October 2021. Maybe not at the same capacity as previously, but at least establishing connectivity to most of the destinations we were served before COVID. And it's just what's worrying is that the airlines might have these great plans, but we're all reliant on what governments, what the government regulations will be, and would travelers be allowed to go on those flights? Because I think the only thing saving airlines currently is that if they are flying into South Africa or many other African destinations, probably is that they are, they've got space to carry cargo, and the cargo revenue that they're generating is making up for the loss in passenger revenue. So of the airlines, operating into Cape Town specifically now, I think most of them are, almost keeping afloat just by having some cargo to transport. We're seeing load factors of about 40%, which, for no airline is a good figure to have internationally. So yes, I mean, we are optimistic for summer 2021, but, I've heard a lot of talk of people saying, things will only get back to normal in 2022, 2023. But we've got advantages in Africa that we need to use, and I think we'll get to that a little bit later. But yes, there's some things working in our favor.
No, I think that's it's good to hear the optimism. I tend to concur with you that I think the northern winter, southern summer, a lot of consumers, especially from the northern hemisphere, have had too much time locked up in the cold over there, and they will start looking at warmer climes for their winter/summer holidays in that respect. But that brings us now to the terms of vaccinations, and that's something very interesting that that Gillian mentioned during the last discussion, and that I saw she had also posted on LinkedIn earlier, which is that Victoria Falls area has now achieved herd immunity through a combination of vaccinations and other protocols. In general, however, vaccine rollout in Africa is a lot slower. In fact, in pretty much all African countries, is a lot slower than it is in many other more developed parts of the world. Do we see, or do we think that this might have a negative impact on the pace of air service and tourism recovery and growth into Africa? That Africa might be viewed both by Africans as well as by external potential travelers as a dangerous destination because the pace of vaccination is not as high as, say, in the US or in the UK or so forth. Sean, let's see what your thoughts on this are.
So the fact that the speed of vaccination is lagging, or it appears to be lagging across the continent, as you indicated here, is, I guess, one of the major issues that's being used against us. And from a scientific perspective, and I'm not a scientist and I don't have all those figures readily available, but just looking at the messaging from some of the inbound tourism recovery groups that I see there, and some of the folk there that are really focused and a little more specialized around that area. It depends on what we're measuring, and when we start looking at the recovery rate, we also look at what the spread is compared to some other countries, established markets, other countries further up north on that there. It begs the question to say, is Africa truly in the right place in terms of what's being communicated from a media perspective and from a red zone perspective? And we're all biased. I mean, we're Africans, we're here, and we don't believe it is. If we believe, we also look at the geographical outline, we look at the kind of products that are available, and the kind of safety that you actually have, or the risk factors that are completely reduced in terms of what products are actually on hand there. I think it takes for more meaningful conversation and engagement at an authority level across the key stakeholders, be it from a government and a private sector perspective, that actually works with World Health Organization, the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and views from scientists to actually come up with a meaningful thing. So Center for Disease Control and Prevention for Africa said that probably only towards the end of 22 will 60% of the continent's population possibly be vaccinated. Now, if we think about it, where we are mid-year 21 and we're only seeing that only 60% being vaccinated across the continent by the end of 22, what is it going to do from an aviation perspective, a tourism, the broader tourism perspective? And if we continue to just allow the way communications taking place there and decisions are being made, and we're not seeing enough engagement, and I say enough, and I've got to be very careful how I say this here, because we're not fully aware of what's actually going on in the background, whether ambassadors are being engaged, that are sitting in the various countries that are on the red list, and that they're campaigning hard enough for those particular countries. We're not sure. But it certainly begs the opportunity on that side there. So I think we've got a very challenging time ahead. And it's not yet to go and promote negativity on it there. It's us working in a realistic zone so that we can find some possible solutions and opportunities to actually address this.
No, I think you're absolutely right in that we simply don't have the luxury of waiting for everything to happen in Africa, and there needs to be some meaningful multilateral discussion. Meaningful being the key words over here, because a lot of people are able to sit down and have webinars and things like this, but without and just when they shut it off, go off and collect your per diem and just do nothing further. Dave, this is something which, again, as route development side, I'm sure you've got some more information on this. Has there actually been meaningful multilateral discussion with various international, multinational, and external stakeholders? Has the Western Cape government, for example, been trying to communicate to the UK that, look, it is safe to come to Cape Town. We don't deserve to be on your red list?
Yes, I think there's been a lot of communication out of different sectors in the Western Cape. And I'm sure every country in Africa is doing some kind of effective communication. But from our side, the focus was heavily on the source markets for Cape Town. The UK, Germany, Netherlands, all based in Europe. America is our third biggest market for tourists. So there was a big focus on when we opened the borders for those countries to come back, and there was social media campaigns, there was a combined messaging from the Western Cape government, the city of Cape Town, and Wesgro, to show that, Africa in general has got so much going for it, and I think we're the perfect destination for people that want to get out of this lockdown situation. I mean, we've got wide open spaces, we've got amazing accommodation, we've got activities in the outdoors. So I think that whole messaging has been very prominent in the Western Cape specifically, and I think a lot of other destinations can also, follow that. That trend where we can show that, when you come here, you don't have to even see anyone for a week. You can just go to your own little place and, have a good time. So, I mean, the perception outside is still, I think, is still very negative, and I'm not completely sure how to change that, because I think on the one side, people that have been here know what we're talking about, and tourists from other countries, they know what they get when they come here, and they can see that. But I think governments are very, very scared, and obviously there's a lot of scrutiny on how they deal with with this, and you will get people to say, close the borders for another 2 years, and just keep people in the country, and there will be people that want to travel tomorrow if they can. So it's a very difficult situation. The vaccination, just to get back to that question as well, what I thought and what's happening is totally different, because I thought when vaccination starts, governments will say, well, you don't. You can travel, you don't need to do tests anymore, you don't need to go into quarantine, but that's not happening. Governments are still requiring PCR tests, they're still requiring people to quarantine, even, they're not making differentiation if you're vaccinated or not. You still have to go through all of these other measures. So in a sense, that could be positive for us, because, we won't be treated different if we're not vaccinated, but, I think there's some catching up to do, in terms of that for most countries in Africa.
No, I think you're absolutely right in that, and I think that vaccinations as a vaccine passports, as they like to call it, has been a reality for most people traveling in Africa since time immemorial. I mean, you pick up your passport and you pick up your yellow fever inoculation card pretty much if you need to travel anywhere within Africa now. Well, since as long as I've been traveling within Africa. And I don't think that this absolute vehement rejection of this as a privacy issue would be much of a problem for travel to Africa or within Africa, because it's something that we've always needed. It's something that you're just going to need another stamp on that card rather than a whole new process for it. But mentioning PCR testing and things like that, if I'm not mistaken, I believe 48 African countries have currently opened on the basis of PCR tests rather than quarantine. So that's pretty much over 90% of Africa in that respect. Do we see the high cost and sometimes the difficult logistics of achieving these PCR tests or whatever other kind of tests in some locations stifling the African recovery? For example, PCR tests necessarily require a laboratory. I'll give an example of Malawi. There are 4 labs in the entire country which are capable of doing PCR tests. That's all well and good if you're in a city which has a lab, but if you're in a lodge somewhere in a national park and so forth, you don't have access to being able to provide samples, to be able to do, to comply with your next destination requirements that easily. And this is the kind of thing which, effectively makes some of these wide open spaces and remoteness, which is an attraction in some way, but also makes it more difficult. Is this stifling potentially the recovery of aviation in Africa? And if so, what steps can airlines, airports, and other stakeholders take to ease this somewhat? Sean, let's throw it at you.
So added costs, if we consider the economic impact right now on consumers, and one would have to go and dissect that and go and look at the spending power within the broader scope of consumers per market, you know, and you look at these added costs and you go and look at if there is a family traveling, if it's a family of 4 or 5 people traveling, PCR testing where it's needed, all those aspects. And then comes from a site location perspective. There is even issues. There are certain airlines that are clearly articulating which laboratories in that particular market are being recognized. And that's for obvious reasons. Are they bona fide, recognized with the appropriate certification, etc.? So there's all of that to also come into play. So it comes back to one of the comments that I made earlier there, in terms of actually deciding on a destination you want to go and travel, be it for leisure, and now deciding where am I traveling to, all those regulations from a border entry perspective, the PCR requirements, and by the time that you finish from a documentation perspective there, it's a mammoth task. So unless you also understand how to navigate around all of that there, or you have an agent that is on top of all of this there, it's travel as we know it today is no longer, and it's a very different landscape. You know, and if we take the added costs and how it varies from market to market, South Africa, a PCR test here, 850 Rand per test. Go to other markets, it's slightly more than that. Going to the Middle East, different pricing as well there. So there's the cost aspect, there's the location aspect of this there, and then the recognized service providers around this. I'd like to mention something on Ghana, which is was one of the first African countries to receive its vaccines, and through the COVAX facility and through the Center of Disease Control, read up there that it reached over 470,000 people in areas with the highest number of COVID cases in just 20 days, and including over 60% of its phased target population, around 90% of all health workers that were actually reached there. So, Sean, when there's a willingness and at the authority level that they are aligned, that they're focused on what the objective is, and there is a clear plan of rollout and achieving the objectives, it's possible. It's positivity that is just detailed in that little bit of editorial content that makes a massive difference in terms of actually communicating to consumers out there, taking that information, communicating it at ambassadorial level to the respective governments and actually working with it there. So there's no shortage of achievements that have actually been made in many of the countries in Africa there. I think the question that we constantly facing and is, why are we on the back foot in so many respects with some of the countries, with the continent, etc., when there is incredible sophistication around many of the markets here, the skills that are there around scientists, around governments that are leading progressive activities and things with it there. And I think it needs to come off a single platform where it's driven and it's spoken about, and we actually start singing what is actually happening in Africa, which will start changing some of the perceptions. And sorry, if I can just add on this there, I don't make light of the situation around COVID at all. We understand the severity around it. We are all mindful about the incredible importance around health and safety. Learning to coexist with a virus in this time of pandemic, in order for economic improvement and in order for economies to actually grow, for GDP contribution to continue its course in terms of contributing towards key infrastructure projects, etc. All of that needs to continue happening to fund medical research, to fund hospitals. So it's this vicious circle. If we don't find the positivity that's actually being achieved, and also that there are countries that sit on other countries, on governments there where things are not happening at the speed there that it needs to, that the relevant pressure is actually put on them there as well there, because it just goes down that entire value chain.
Now, I think you're extremely right, and I'll add a little bit of 2 bits on the Ghana side, because it was somewhere that I was very closely involved with the reopening of initially domestic travel in Ghana under enhanced protocols, and that's one thing that, as you say, a success story which we don't hear enough about. That Ghana went into it with the attitude of, we have coexisted with pandemics for many, many years. Ghana's had to deal with Ebola in the backyard. Ghana's had to deal with other bird flus and H1N1s and things like that. And you're never going to be able to completely eradicate it, but you can't stop life until that happens. And the approach was very much a case of, look, this is what our health system is able to properly deal with. If we can deal with, say, a 5% positivity rate or whatever caseload, we must ensure that we bring the numbers not to 0, but to somewhere between 0 and that 5. So certainly, we're never going to be able to open our borders and ensure that that we're going to eradicate COVID and not bring in any new cases, no matter, and we've seen this with Australia and New Zealand, with sealed borders and so-called models, they actually have higher case rates per capita from their imported infections that sneak through the quarantine than some African countries do with a PCR testing regime. And as you say, Ghana, with the dual test PCR regime for entry, which is you test 72 hours in advance, and then again you do a rapid test upon arrival at the airport, achieved, I think the target was something in the 95% range in terms of being able to catch cases. It achieved more than that. And certainly right now, especially with passengers coming from India and other high-risk areas, they're catching 50 to 100 people a day at the airport who would otherwise have sneaked in. And those are actually success stories. If you are intercepting people at the border and putting them in the care that they do require, this is something that African countries have done really well. And the smaller countries, the places like Liberia and Sierra Leone and DRC, which have dealt with pandemics in the recent memory, have been able to implement these a lot better than they get credit for. And I think that that was a very good point you made, and something I wanted to wave the flag for Ghana, and what was really a good approach for in that. And Dave, do you have something to add on this front in terms of the the potential that what airlines, airports, and stakeholders can do to ease the concerns and communicate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, sometimes we obviously shoot ourselves in the foot, but because we like the negative stories, and that's all that's put in the news. So the positive stories never really make it to the headlines, and that's what happens when it goes overseas as well. It's never the good news stories that make it there. So, I mean, I think I would believe that everyone is trying their best to navigate this, and it's unfortunate that the front line for opening up borders is probably the airlines and the airports. I mean, that's where your key, your key almost gateway would be, where you had to stop, as you said, where you have to stop people coming in that's infected. So it adds a burden to them that financially, and obviously I think even probably psychologically to the staff that are employed there. But they are the first defense in this. And I think in the case of South Africa, I think AXA has done pretty well to manage this. If I'm just looking at airports now, and they were straight out of the gate implementing protocols, making sure that health and safety is at the forefront of reopening airports. And I think it's showing in our domestic travel. I mean, if I speak out of experience for South Africa now, we've seen that domestic travel is up to about 60% of 2019 levels in South Africa. it shows that traveler confidence is there. People want to, fly to obviously visit friends and family, but I think it's turning into now, holidays and business travel. So I think I also mentioned yesterday when we spoke, unfortunately, that last 30% that we need is the international travelers coming back that use our domestic airlines to connect domestically. And that's going to take some time. But I mean, that's why I'm so positive, because I've seen this domestic picture and I've seen people, willing to travel. So I'm sure it's the same for, for other African countries, although most of them probably don't have a well-developed domestic travel, air travel sector like South Africa. And that makes it a little bit more difficult to build that confidence internally.
Now, I think that's very true, and as you've said, I think Sean also mentioned this, that the information, it's a combination of lack of information and information overload, where you don't get the right information out, but there's too much information for someone who goes looking for it. And that actually got me thinking of something while we were having this discussion. Do we foresee that there may be an increase in managed travel, as in packages or something complete end-to-end? We will deal with your visas, we will deal with your testing, we will deal with everything, as opposed to independent travel coming out as a trend, over the next few years at least, especially in markets like Africa, where it's not quite as friendly towards the independent traveler in terms of information access and so forth as some of the more developed tourism destinations may be. Sean, this is something that you got me thinking about. What do you think?
So that's already started developing, and if we take travel management companies, we take the impact on that sector of the business, and across Africa, and with most countries trying to reboot tourism, and looking at how are their airlines going to survive, how are routes going to be reopened, how are new routes going to develop, what is happening on the domestic front landscape, how are products developing that side, is there enough communication about the products, about the attractions within their own particular countries, how progressive are the tourism associations, the tourism boards in those respective countries, other countries more proactive, etc. So it begs for a lot of insight on that. And I think what probably stems out now in terms of what is the new service delivery or the service offering, the value proposition that is being brought about travel management companies speaks exactly into what you're saying now. It's that complete sense of comfort from a health and safety perspective, a destination specialist, booking airlines where there is flexibility in terms of the fares that are actually selected there. So your insight around those RBDs in terms of what are the regulations in terms of refunds, all of that comes into play, and that is the entire package offering. So I think, if we start looking at how the consumer moves forward and in terms of what is going to be their needs, definitely speaks into an all-rounded kind of offering, from the start of inquiry right through to actually returning into the country, what is the documentation that's actually needed, and it then starts speaking into these travel passports, etc., the electronic document storage areas as well, in terms of that validity, and of course all the safety aspects around it. And I can't help thinking that the opportunity that continues speaking to all of us there is probably from a broad partnership level, and understanding, how do you actually come together and start talking multi-sectoral partnerships, so that it is not only focused on your own country, but stimulating domestic travel is one aspect of it. Rebooting tourism needs to encompass also the opportunities around regional travel. And so if we take the continent, we take the opportunities that actually exist there, is how do we as service providers, all of it, work with the airlines and not leave just the responsibility on the airlines there to look at route developments, but how do we all collectively play a role in terms of making sure that there is sufficient product, information, opportunities, all the research needed that we can actually also start stimulating this regional travel?
I think that is an exceptional point. And in fact, it leads me into the next question I had already ready to be asked and waiting for an opportunity. Do we see the pandemic as an opportunity for us to boost intra-African, or more specifically, intra-African regional? Because Africa is, is huge. I mean, Cairo's closer to Canada than it is to Cape Town. As part of the pandemic recovery, is this an opportunity for something like the African Union single African air transport market to jump ahead with implementation for people for regional blocks, whether it is SADC or ECOWAS or EAC, to create blocks that remove more barriers towards international or regional travel and boost that? And from a route development standpoint, is Cape Town seeing more interest from regional carriers recently, or is it something that is more or less business like usual?
We are seeing more interest, and it's quite an interesting topic, because I actually read an article this morning, and it was a 2019 article, and it was talking about unconnected city pairs. With the most traffic, and Cape Town was had 6 out of the 10 routes in Africa.
Wow.
that had the highest traffic numbers, but was unconnected. And fortunately, through the partnership, we've reduced that down to 3 now. So we are connected to 3 of the other destinations. But there's a major opportunity for us to take this further now, and I'm hopeful that this is a positive out of the pandemic, where we can start to collaborate more closely with our other destination partners in Africa, and promote the single African air transport market. I mean, we're always complaining that it's happening very slowly, but I mean, there's so much institutional, I don't know, almost I want to call it institutional backlog in terms of creating this idea that we can travel within Africa without having a lot of rules and regulations that hinder us. But on the other side, I also feel sometimes that a lot of the African countries are hiding behind this SARTM to almost, protect their own markets or limit competition, if I can say that, because if there's a valid case for an international airline from another country, from Europe or America, that wants to fly, and there's no route, or there's no other airline that can service that route, why are we hindering those operations as well? So I think it's a very difficult road that's ahead, and I really hope that the people that are involved in this realize that we have this opportunity now to really almost speed this ahead and get to a place where we where airlines can operate freely within Africa in an open market. So yes.
Okay, I'm going to throw this at Sean Bradley, and I know from some of his emails that he can probably go on for a while about this, but we've got 10 minutes left. We've got some questions coming in, so let's give you a couple of minutes on this, then we'll take some questions. Sean, go ahead.
So there's no shortage of information. IATA's report, ICAO, Africans make up 12% of the world's population and only about 2.5% of the world's passengers. And there's that burning question always, why the gap? And if we considered, I think the report said 2019, Africa has some 731 airports, 419 airlines, and and with an aviation industry that supported something like 6.9 million jobs, 80 billion economic activity, et cetera, we know the landscape has changed. We're in a different era. And so if we take the value chain just around airports, service providers, the airlines, etc., and it speaks into that economic opportunity, how is it that Africa has not yet come together in this COVID era, seen the opportunity with so many borders, international key source markets that were the dependency for many countries in terms of tourism arrivals? Yet, we sit with a population here, 12% of the world's population sitting in Africa. We look at the economic strength in some of these markets. We also look at the spending power around some of the consumer segments within those particular markets. And one can drill down, look at how many dollar-based millionaires there are per market, etc. And we look at the potential of spend in each of the markets. It's here, sitting in the continent. Absolutely. And yet we keep looking at the established markets as the key sources. We're not discounting the value of it at all. The foreign currency spend that needs to take place here, from a MICE perspective, everything, all of it plays a role. But the era that we're in right now, with the opportunities that are actually in front of us, there is so much space for us to actually work as Africa, to come together, to have meaningful discussion across the various tourism associations, and not to look at this just from a competitor perspective per market. For once, put on the competitor hats, actually come together and say, what are the opportunities product-wise? What is the safety and the health situation per country? Come up with a model and say, these are the countries safe to travel with within Africa, the incredible products, and put something across. While the world is trying to reboot, while we're trying to find solutions around the pandemic, etc., learning to coexist with it, there are markets in Africa here that could really serve into that. And if we take, I just mentioned my last point on that there is, if we just take what from a partnership perspective, Angola, Ghana, Mauritius, Rwanda, all of them have stressed the need for this multi-sectoral partnership to be in place. And, if we're not looking after what is outside our borders, opportunities on that there, a year down the line, 2022, we are still going to be complaining and have these issues why tourism has not grown. And I think we've just there's got to be more mindful thought around how do we maximize in Africa.
I could not agree with you more. It's been one of my pet peeves. And, when I was in Ghana, my constant comment to the tour operators and to the stakeholders were that you continue to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars marketing to the UK and US source markets, which certainly are worthwhile spend because you're drawing people from them, but you've got the market of Nigeria, the largest market in Africa, sitting on your doorstep with 10 to 12 flights a day back and forth, and a product that you can really market to the Nigerians. A Nigerian can travel to Ghana for less than the cost of simply applying for a British visa. And yet there is very little effort that is being put to market Africa to other African countries. So I could not agree with you more on that front. Let's get to some questions here. I know I've got one here from Tess. What can we do to help drive the Ghana case study into our destinations? And I think that's a very good question, because it brings us to something that all of us have actually stressed on during this discussion, which is the importance of communication and consistency. As I mentioned earlier, I was closely involved with Ghana, specifically with the restart of domestic flights. And Ghana was the first country in Africa and the second country in the world after Vietnam to restart domestic flights after shutting them down due to COVID. So we had a 3-week shutdown in Ghana, after which we began to restart the flights under enhanced protocols. And it was a few weeks of hell, where we sat with the health services, with the airports company, the Civil Aviation Authority, and pretty much every agency that had a stake in the matter, where everybody had their input. And then we looked at those inputs in terms of how to develop that into a policy. But once that policy was done and adopted and endorsed by the Office of the President and the COVID task force and so forth, it remained. And this is something that I'm so proud about, that when flights opened on 1st of May 2020, as of today, which is the 12th of May 2021, the protocols have not changed. The protocols are still in place because when they developed them, they were robust enough. In fact, the only easement of the protocols has been the need to block middle seats, or the social distancing on board. Once it was established that onboard transmission risk is a lot lower, that was done away with in July last year. But other than that, what was done the first time, what was communicated the first time, has remained. And when you see that consistency over there, people understand, people gain confidence in it. It's a similar thing which Ghana saw with the opening of borders. The 2-test protocol, when it came out, was the first country which had the double testing protocol at the time. It's now been adopted in some form or the other by pretty much most serious countries in the world, whether it is testing upon arrival in home quarantine or testing at airports or so forth. And despite pressure, there have been times where, when Ghana had a second wave, where it's been, oh my God, we're doing this. The decisions were taken for the right reason, with collaboration, with input from all the stakeholders. And once those decisions were taken and implemented, without a good reason to change them, they would not change for political purposes. And, it's something which I'd contrast it, sorry to the South Africans there, with South Africa's approach of, lockdown 3 enhanced, lockdown 2A. And truly, it was, my in-laws were in South Africa during one of the lockdowns, and simply trying to understand what they were allowed to do, where they can go at what time, and, are they allowed to buy hot food? It was something that, 2 70-plus-year-olds were not quite able to understand. It was just, I spent hours and hours reading through contradictory information and got it. And that's not something that they had a problem. So I think if there's one lesson that could be learned from successful, whether the policy is good or not, the policy will bring in more confidence in consumers and allow a recovery to take place faster, economically, as well as in consumer confidence, if it is consistent. Consistency in communication is critical in that respect. And I think that is the one thing that, not just from the Ghana experience, but from most successful countries who have dealt with the pandemic and who have been able to recover in their tourism and aviation sectors, have been consistent in how things have done. Whether it's been a good policy or a bad policy, consistency has helped the recovery a lot better. Okay, I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So if any of you have something you want to add on this, otherwise I think we will have to hand it back to Tess. Dave, do you want to add something before we hand over?
Yeah, maybe just my final comment, and I agree with you. I mean, keep it simple, keep the messaging simple, be consistent, awesome. And for the rest of the countries, our example works so well in terms of route development for Cape Town air access, because we've got buy-in from government, we've got buy-in from the private sector, we've got buy-in from the airport, and we provide one single message to the airlines, and we communicate with them, through this project. So it's not different messages reaching them. It's a clear and consistent messaging from us as well. So I think that ties into your message that you said now. So for us, it's all about the collaboration that was mentioned in the previous session as well, and keeping that going. And I think that's the way to work together in Africa as well.
Absolutely. And Sean, final thoughts from you.
I think my last words here is just to focus on the importance and why it's crucial for broad partnerships to exist, or be improved on, and for multi-sectoral partnerships to also be kind of cascaded. And if we just take in South Africa, for example, We've got BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, that represents the various industries. And those particular industries have all their associations. And when you actually start just working on the line of commonality in terms of economic development, and it's aviation, and it plays such a critical role in terms of moving a country forward from an economic growth perspective. And, you know, we're mindful about everything around greening and keeping things safe for the environment, but it all carries a kind of role in that there. So my last words, broad partnerships are crucial. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone, for this. Hashtag fly safe, fly confident, hashtag no more African silos, etc., etc. Thanks very much for this joining on this aviation discussion. I'll hand back to Tess now.
Thank you, Sean Mendes, David King, Sean Bradley. What a pleasure. I think there's so much that we could all pick up from there and hopefully bring back a lot of those messages into our own destinations. You know, learning to collaborate, and of course the consistency in that messaging is absolutely critical, and we've seen it go wrong in several places, including our own backyards. So thank you for that wonderful discussion. Before I go ahead and introduce my next panel, Rudy has a couple of polls for us. I think if we could bring up the first one, please, Rudy. Let's see. Do you believe that Africa can come out of the downturn and bounce back stronger than where we were before? So give us a yes or a no, and we'll give you a few more seconds. Let's just see how it goes. I am seeing positive. I'm seeing one negative. Mostly positive. Give it another 2 seconds. Let's see. Well, happy to say, I think, Rudy, we can stop that poll there. I'd say, with the exception of one vote, everybody's quite positive that Africa will recover. The question, of course, is when, and that's a completely separate discussion. Let's take one more poll before we move on. And how confident do you feel in being able to guide your clients on entry and travel regulations? So number 1, not confident at all, and up to 10, very confident. So let's have a look and see what our opinions are there. How confident do you feel in being able to guide your clients on entry and travel regulations? Is our communication confusing out there, or do we actually know what we need to communicate? And this is very interesting. It's very much a mixed bag, which goes to the point that our aviation panelists just lifted out. In fact, in our first conversation, it also came out as the inconsistency of messaging from our governments, and that is really something that we need to address, and that certainly directs to the fact that there's so much confusion about the safety of our destinations. Do we need to be on a red list? That's another point of discussion all on its own. So thank you for that, Rudy. And with that, I'd like to introduce our next panel, starting with Mr. Chris Mears. He's the CEO of ATA. Mr. Graham Alderman, the Managing Director of Altera Events in the UK, and of course, Barbara Adoso, Managing Director from MICE Uganda. Welcome, everybody. I would like to give you each an opportunity to just introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll get straight into the discussion. Chris, shall we start with you?
Great, thank you, Tess. Great to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity. It'd be great to know where everyone is joining us from today. So as a little bit of an introduction to myself, I'm Chris Mears. I'm the Chief Executive of the African Travel and Tourism Association. We're a UK-based trade association promoting tourism to Africa. So we have members in around 50 countries around the world, all of them with one common goal, and that is tourism to Africa. Primarily, we're focused on leisure tourism, but we do have our fingers on the pulse across the world with regards to what's going on in the source markets, what's going on in a variety of destinations. And I hope that I'll be able to share a few insights with you as to what's going on, especially out of the UK, as very much as a source market. So thank you very much, Tess.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Graham, welcome. Lovely to see you. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Graham Alderman. I'm the MD and owner of Ulterior Events. We're a UK-based boutique incentive agency. It's our 30th year this year. My father started the business 30 years ago, and our core business has and still is incentive travel, UK groups. We are big Africa fans, as Tess and everybody knows. Been there many, many times with UK groups, and that's our industry. We're a specialist incentive agency, 30 years young, and still loving what we do and looking forward to getting back to our day job.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. I think we all have those sentiments about getting back to our day jobs. I see Barbara's online, but we can't see her. Barbara, can you turn on your video for us, please, and your sound? Is she with us? Let's give her a moment. Well, I think while we wait for Barbara to connect, Chris, may we please start with you? As you said, UK, a very big source market for Africa. Give us a bit of an overview of the landscape. What is happening in the UK? What are the sentiments? What do we need to know? Okay,
well, we are very much gradually emerging from a long lockdown. We had lockdowns last year, they eased, we went back down into lockdowns, and lockdowns happened again at the beginning of this year. However, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, announced that we would have a roadmap towards recovery, and we are progressing through that at the moment. So from a domestic perspective, things are beginning to open up. We are all absolutely delighted that as of Monday, we're able to go into a pub and a restaurant and sit down and have a meal. We don't have to sit outside in the rain under an umbrella freezing cold. So that is one of the most exciting elements from a domestic perspective. But also, it means that travel, as of Monday, travel once again becomes legal. So we've had essentially our borders have been closed. Travel for leisure purposes has been illegal. And the only reason why you've been able to travel is for certain specific exemptions. But largely travel is now becoming legal once again. Our government has imposed a traffic light system. So we now have red, amber, and green. A handful of countries are on the green list. Majority of the world is on the amber list. And sadly, the majority of East and Southern Africa, notably with the exception of Uganda, are on the red list. And the red list means quarantine on arrival in a hotel at the cost of £1,750 for 10 days, plus 2 tests. So in terms of anyone traveling, it is very, very prohibitive. And on top of that, our borders from red list countries are only open to British citizens and British residents. So it is quite a challenge at the moment in terms of the overall travel sphere. But there are very, very small steps going in the right direction, getting things moving once again.
Thank you, Chris. A little bit daunting, one would say, especially for Africa being a source destination, and of course, good news with Uganda. And I was about to introduce Barbara from Uganda, and she disappeared. I think she's also having some connectivity issues. Hopefully, she'll join us soon. But Graham, over to you. As you said, you've got this passionate affair with Africa. Do you want to give us a little bit of an overview of your travels and your experience, and what has stood out for you over the past few years?
I think Tess, you and I first met in Cape Town, didn't we? When Father had the business, and that was our first knowing each other then. And I always say, when I first got into the business, Cape Town was always that sort of long haul waterside sort of destination, the V&A and Table Mountain, and there's certain countries and cities you go to around the world which you just like. forget the plus side of groups and the business that we're in, but you just go to a city and go, I really like this city. And I always felt that Cape Town, another one is Vancouver. They're two cities that I went to and went, I really like these cities. And so Cape Town, I sort of was my first sort of intro into Southern Africa. We had groups there. And to be fair, and I still talk as passionately about Cape Town now as I did 10 years ago when I first went there. It's still, in my opinion, one of the best long haul 4-day, 3-night destinations that we do, primarily because you get off the plane after a few hours kip, the time difference isn't too mad. It's an hour, 2 hours, depending on the time of the year, and you hit the ground running. So you can go long haul and you're not going to be by 4 o'clock in the afternoon dead on your feet for 2 days sort of thing. So that was the initial sort of inroad to Cape Town. And then I started, obviously, safari. As you know, I've got a passion for safari. Been very fortunate prior to lockdown. My last 2 trips prior to lockdown was in February. I spent time in the Masai Mara, and then went to Rwanda and climbed the mountains to meet the gorillas. So that was my February. And I came back, and a week later I went to Sabi with a group, and took the group then onto Zambia, and then the group onto Botswana. So my last 2 trips before the whole world stopped spinning were 5 countries in Africa, and I have another one. We have another group going back out there in March 2021, 2022. Sorry, subject to all the restrictions being lifted. But I just have so much passion for the people, the culture, the wildlife. There's so much to be. It's so much good. There's so much good. I can never quite get the words out because I'm so passionate and I love it so much. I would sit with groups and sell dreams about Africa because it's very easy to paint pictures with words because it's such a beautiful place, beautiful people, and I will be bringing groups there for as long as I can.
Well,
basically.
What a fantastic ambassador. Thank you, Graham. You've officially been appointed. Now, looking at your clients, obviously having you sell the destination with so much passion really, really helps. But if you look at your client base in general, what is the sentiment? Are they excited with the idea of traveling to Africa, or are they nervous, or what is the picture there?
I think the difficulty we have at the moment is this conversation and it's great to have it now, but we're all playing bits of guesswork and we're all trying to weave together roadmaps, and it's not, the whole world's not on the same page, as we know. The vaccination rollouts is different. The COVID figures are different. So you can only talk general about a specific destination on what you know, not what you think you know or what you think you're going to know, what you know now. So Africa at the moment, based on exactly what Chris just said to everybody, that it is on the red list, or certainly the parts that we bring groups to, you're going to be hard pushed to sit in front of a client and go, no, it'll be fine in March, commit, pay deposits, etc. Because you'd be lying. You know me, Tess. I'm honest. I don't have a filter, but I'm honest, and I'd be lying if I sat in front of a client and went, you'll be fine for next year. We keep our fingers crossed. We know this is an ever-changing model that we're in. We know that the amber list and the red list and the green list, everybody wants that to change, and it will change as best and quickly as our government gets around to doing it. So I would sit there and talk passionately about Africa. We pitched a safari to Kapama for May. That we're openly having conversations. If you're asking me now, will I be able to say to a client, you must go there? It will be from an encouragement perspective, because I want them to go because it's fantastic. If it was based around COVID, I'm still, like everybody else, waiting for the bits to fit into place. So the customers are open for the conversations, Tess. They're open to talk and they're open to listen. Nobody's going, don't tell me about Africa, or because they're not. They're but you're still at the stage at the moment. We're still, although it seems like we're coming out of it and we are in the UK and the roadmap's falling into place, we're still a little bit early to go, I can guarantee this will be fine.
Right.
But they are talking. So the encouraging perspective is you're not getting shut down and going, right, I just want to talk about A, B, and C on the green list. That's not what's happening. People still, now I've got 2 incentives confirmed in the last 2 weeks, which are proper, decent sized groups for next year, not to Africa, but clients are committing to proper incentives next year. So that's a huge shift from 6 months ago. They are signing contracts, committing to numbers, and putting these these sales incentives out in their companies, and that's what you want. So it's happening. It's just each country, each destination, is just based on perception and fact, and that's not always a great mix, because fact and perception sometimes need blending. So the encouragement is incentives are being talked about. We've got a couple confirmed. Another one we're talking about has got Africa as part of that pitch. Will it happen? I don't know, but there's some encouragement there.
That is brilliantly positive. Thank you, Graham. And of course, the confidence, as we had in our previous discussions, the confidence is always going to play a major role, be it, the fear of quarantine, be it the rollout of vaccinations and all these good things. And, it all forms one big package in terms of, will a client travel or not. But I'm so happy that Barbara has managed to hook up with us. Barbara, welcome. And let me hand over to you for a moment to tell us who you are, where you're from, and all the hats you're wearing. Over to you.
Good afternoon from Kampala, Uganda. My name is Barbara Adoso Van Hellepute. I'm from Uganda. Our company is called Mice Uganda, and we trade as ASEAN with safaris and incentives. Today, I'm basically here to share a little bit about Uganda and to really hear what other things we have to learn through what Africa needs to do. So Tess, thank you very much for having me here.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us. Rudy, may I ask you to just quickly bring up those slides a bit? Before I'm going to ask Barbara to speak to us more about her destination. We recently, through SITE, did a survey towards the end of last year. Two back, please, Rudy. Thank you. There we are. This was done as recently as September, October last year. Obviously, the research component was much larger than this, but this is just a small excerpt from it. And this was the response from UK buyers. What were their top destinations? So 2018, we saw Southern Africa feature. 2019, even more so. 2020, we are looking at the other Africa. So next slide, please, Rudy. So what is the other Africa? We're going to debate that a little bit. So classically, we'd look at South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, specifically around the Victoria Falls there, the Kaza region that we had on the panel right to at the beginning. North Africa, your typical incentive destinations, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia. West Africa, Ghana, Senegal. I'm not sure how much of an incentive destination Nigeria would be, but it's certainly a big meeting destination. East Africa, we're looking Kenya, Tanzania, Zanzibar. Now, what is the other Africa? So over the past few years, 5 years ago, who would have thought of taking an incentive trip to Rwanda, let alone a meeting? That has completely changed, and very, very proud to say that Graham had his, was it last year, beginning of last year, Graham, that you had your first experience there. And I think, all of a sudden, Rwanda is front of people's minds. And then Uganda, from a meetings perspective, baba boom, 2019, 6 on the ICA list in Africa. So that tells a story. So Barbara, before I get to you, Graham, what is your take on this? And then maybe Chris, we can hear from you as well. What do you think is the other Africa?
I think from my perspective, just Africa as a whole. Look, you know me, Tess. I do site inspections. We do our own self-funded fam trips. We don't just sit and wait for a freebie to land on our desk, because we want to know what we're talking about. So the Rwanda trip with Kenya was a sort of a part self-funded fam trip with our DMC. And for me, to sell the other Africa as an incentive, you've got to know it. Because then you can talk about. This is where perception comes in. There's perceptions about parts of Africa that can be sort of pigeonholed with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, bad news, bad press, and everything else. And if that's what's the perception is, then it's very difficult without any knowledge. So the thing that always amazes me, and I know that Rwanda and the guerrilla experience and the economy that's been built around it is luxury, because ultimately it's a very, very expensive thing to do. But the thing for me about Rwanda was the hotels, the food, the transfer, the transport, everything was a perfect incentive destination. It's expensive because of what's at the end of it, which is this once in a lifetime opportunity to sit with a silverback and his family. That there is no money, well, there's no price on that. Unfortunately, there is a budget on it though, so that's where it becomes something for an incentive spend. But I think with Rwanda now and Uganda and the DRC and all these places that are unfortunately they're graded by perception news over the last 10, 20 years, current news. So for you guys and the DMCs in these destinations, it's about the confidence and the trust when you take a group there. You know the scenery's there, you know the culture's there, you know the wildlife is there, because that's. But what you need to do, what we all need as agents in the UK, is just the belief in the story from the minute you get off the plane to the minute you go back on it. Is it going to feel like an incentive, or is it going to be moments? And that's really what, to me, the other Africa. It's not selling the obvious. It's not selling the gorillas in the mountains outside of Rwanda, because they're still there. It's about what's on the ground, the hotels, the transfers, the food. You don't want to be going to hotels where you're going to have a security guard sitting on every floor with it overnight just in case. You don't want that perception sitting in front of the client. So that's the other Africa to me. It's about just sort of busting the myths, shall I say, and painting the pictures that go, yeah, you can bring groups here because it is spectacular and it's safe and it's luxury and it's fab and you're going to have a great time. And that's what it's all about for me.
Well, thank you. You've actually just answered my next question as well, and that was going to be, what, in your opinion, makes an incentive destination? So done and dusted. Well put. Thank you, Graham. Chris, what are the messages you're picking up from your market? What do you think would be the other Africa, let's say, for the leisure travelers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the points that Graham made, and I mean, first-hand knowledge is absolutely vital, because it's so important to scratch under the surface, scratch under what is well known, what is sort of a typical African destination, your safari, your beach. Especially in certain locations, cities, it's actually getting beyond that and doing something different. Graham mentioned the gorillas in Rwanda, and I mean, yes, it is an expensive option. It's marginally cheaper across the border in Uganda, but it's wonderful that all of that money is ploughed back into the conservation, to protecting these amazing creatures that are so close to us as humans. It is just absolutely fascinating. And what I'm loving seeing is very much on the leisure perspective is before COVID, there was a real growth of multi-destinational itineraries. So pulling together various locations, and Rwanda was one of the key areas that was growing. And I put a lot of that down to the growth of Rwanda. So obviously we've got direct services between the UK and Rwanda, which is a huge help. And then those interconnectivity within East and Southern Africa. But another destination that I think is a key other Africa destination would be Ethiopia. It's a fascinating destination. It's got a lot of history. I know from my perspective growing up, I mean, what we all think about Ethiopia is 1984 Live Aid and the famine, but it's a vastly different perspective to that. You've got a huge amount of history, you've got a huge amount of culture, you've got some wonderful scenery, some amazing areas. So it's very much about getting underneath the surface, and by having that first-hand knowledge, you're able to scratch underneath it and experience something and show something unique to your clients, be those incentive meetings or the leisure traveler.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Rudy, can we just move on to the last slide, please, and then we'll continue the discussion with Barbara. So one thing very interesting that came out, what are the major, motivations for incentive groups? And Graham, feel free to jump in here anytime if you have a different perspective. But 2019, Cultural experiences came out very strongly. Group dining, which comes back to our earlier discussion, that connectivity between people, the bonding of the group, team building, and of course your luxury bucket list experiences. And here, bucket list, we're not talking about your dying wish, we're talking about once in a lifetime kind of experiences. So when they did the survey in 2020, that has changed, and we're now looking at that once in a lifetime experience was first and foremost. Then your cultural experiences, CSR and wellness coming through quite strongly, which boils down to the travel with a conscience. And what I spoke of earlier on is potentially how incentive travel and groups might change in future, possibly looking at smaller groups, looking for more exclusive experiences. As I said, you know, here in Africa, social distancing is not optional. It's a way of life, creating a sense of security for the groups. But I'm going to stop talking there. It's really up to our panelists to bring us the reality of where we're at. So, Barbara, can you give us an overview of your destination? What are the key points? And I think one thing that was mentioned earlier is that you are not on the Africa Red List. Give us a bit of an overview of what's happening in Uganda.
Thank you, Tess. We call Uganda the Pearl of Africa. I'm actually surprised that not a lot of people have known about us, because we probably haven't spoken enough about what Uganda has to offer. So let me just give you a brief overview about Uganda as a destination. So Uganda basically is based in East Africa, and East Africa has about 5 other countries. You have Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and recently South Sudan as well joined East Africa. So in East Africa, we're literally landlocked as a country. So you will find we basically will connect to the lake through, to the ocean through Kenya or through Tanzania. But what do we find in Uganda? We have both the leisure and the meeting aspect to it. And as Tess earlier on mentioned, in 2019, Uganda was actually named number 6 in Africa for meetings. And that was really because Uganda only joined ICAR around about 2018, 2019, but we've been holding several other meetings before that. We have quite a number of travelers that come in, and actually the UK is our number 1 source market for leisure tourism, because we get a lot of visitors from the UK. I think it's all because of the background and the language and the ease of movement within Uganda. When you look at our accessibility, Uganda is connected by several airlines, and recently Uganda also bought, or we introduced our national fleet, Uganda Airlines, which has the newest fleet in Africa and the youngest fleet, quite very modern. And they're opening up new routes, and I think June we will start direct flights into Joburg. We're also getting direct flights into Dubai and London, and then other regional markets have already been operational. In terms of connectivity, Uganda is quite well connected. Kenya Airways, Ethiopian Airlines, Emirates, Qatar, KLM, Brussels Airlines. So we're not hard to get to. We are on the equator, +3 GMT, so it's easy to get to us. Multilingual destination. Our currency is easily convertible, so that shouldn't be a problem for anybody that is visiting. In terms of attractions, Uganda has quite a number of attractions. I just mentioned a couple of them. I heard everybody talking about gorillas in Rwanda. We have gorillas in Uganda. We have more than half of the world population of gorillas in Uganda, and accessible, obviously, by a gorilla permit. And for those who've already had a chance to visit the gorillas, you know it's a very unique experience. Everybody really just speaks about it for themselves. It is one of those once-in-a-lifetime kind of experiences, bucket list items that somebody would really want to try and experience. And then we also have an aspect of team building. When you look at rafting on the Nile, we have the longest river in the world, that's the River Nile, with 5 times the water found in the Zambezi. So for those who are looking to do whitewater rafting adventure, we have quite a number of adventure activities. We've got the 3rd highest mountain in Africa called the Rwenzori Mountains, and it has snow on the equator. Even though Uganda is a destination, we don't have snow. So again, a very good, activity for those who are looking to test their endurance abilities and adventure lovers. We also have a very, very varied culture. We have over 64 different tribes, languages, and dialects. So the culture is very vast. The history is huge and amazing. We have over 600-year-old kingdoms that are some of the oldest in Africa. We have the oldest tribe that were mainly occupying most of Africa, called the Batu and the Bambuli, who are originating from the hunter-gatherers, and they are mainly forest people. So now they've been concentrated into the small areas in the forest, but actually out of the forest now because of the protections that have been given to the forest. We have a very good climate, so all year round, almost summer weather-like conditions. So it's a very good destination to visit almost any time during the year. We have very good connectivity for ICT. We have 4G internet network, even though today, excuse my challenges with technology, but we do have very good internet connectivity. Our visas, I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but we have the East Africa tripartite visa that allows you to buy one visa to visit Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya. And then our visas are easily obtainable online. You can actually simply apply online and then you come and acquire your visa at the airport for $50 single entry. And if you're looking to do the tripartite visa, it's $100 and you can visit the 3 different countries. We have, you're looking to do some CSR as one of the items Tess mentioned on her previous slide. CSR activities are something that you can easily do as a way of giving back as a corporation, whether you're doing it as a deliberate activity or part of the side activities you can do. I love listening to what Graham said about confidence. It is true that you need to have confidence as, first of all, the incentive house that is going to bring an incentive group into Uganda. So indeed, like Chris mentioned, first-hand information is relevant. So we always encourage all the incentive houses that are looking to sell an incentive into Uganda, because you can actually do some very good incentives in Uganda, because we have some really beautiful sceneries, some very beautiful attractions, and a very good story that an incentive group would enjoy. I agree that you need to get first-hand information. So we always encourage farm trips, because when you do come, you're able to really assess what the destination has to offer. I also like to hear what, I think it was Chris that mentioned something about not wanting to see a security guard in every floor. While that certainly is not a very good side for an incentive group, I think it's really about having to hear what people like Chris are saying, so that we can also amend our ways and our presentation of the product. Because we assume that, okay, when you have a security guard, then you'll be confident that your security is taken care of. But while on the other hand, it could be communicating a negative story. So I think I appreciate that we actually get to hear these kind of comments, because then if we have to organize and have an incentive group come around, we need to just amend and adjust our ways in order to ensure that the experience that the group has and the perceptions that they get while they're in the destination are not communicating the wrong image and the wrong perspective, because of the difference in perceiving the different activities or the different things that are put out there to expose the client to a particular product. So I think in terms of the hotels, we have some really good hotels. We have 5-star hotels, 4-star and 3-star. And recently, again, the Uganda Tourism Board has been grading some more hotels and also assessing the others that had been graded before, to make sure that they continue with the standards that have been set. So we are having the East Africa grading standards. So meaning that whatever standards you find in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, would be the same one that you'd also find in Uganda, because we are following the East Africa grading standards. So that is something that should give confidence and consistency in the product that is delivered. In terms of food, we have a lot of very organic food, and the cuisines vary from Oriental to international cuisine. So all the hotels are able to serve all types of cuisine. So you wouldn't find a situation where a client is not able to get the kind of food they want. Obviously, while working with the incentive house, we're able to get all the details about what the different dietary requirements are. And the hotels are in a very good position, as well as the lodges, to deliver the right kind of food and the right kind of cuisine that somebody is looking for. In terms of security, Uganda is relatively very secure in comparison to most of the African continents. So I think that shouldn't be a problem. Obviously, belief is created by ensuring that you can verify that the product really does exist, that the delivery can be done and the confidence can be built. So again, the confidence and the belief will really depend on how we can work hand in hand with the incentive house that is bringing in the incentive group. Hope that can communicate a bit about Uganda.
That was very comprehensive. Thank you, Barbara. Graham, from an incentive house point of view, what is your, I don't want to say advice, but what would you recommend from your perspective to a DMC, especially in a destination you haven't been before? And this is now speaking to all our other operators from Africa who are new to incentive travel. What is your recommendation? What needs to be in place, and what do they need to do to make you buy their destination?
I think one of the starting point is to understand the perception that we have of that destination. So I just see a good point from Robin Brown on the questions about Zimbabwe. Now, the UK press for Zimbabwe for the past 20 years has been generally negative. And therefore, the perception, we all know that, again, the beauty that's there, we know the wildlife that's there, we know the hotels that are there, but the perception of a destination is the starting point. So from a DMC perspective or a tourist board perspective, I would try and ask the questions of the agencies in the UK and say, what's your perception of our country? Or what's your perception of our destination? Because that allows you, exactly what Barbara was saying there, when we've had clients, when we talk about going to Nairobi on the way via through to the Maasai in days gone by with security and hotels. And as you said, Barbara, that's from your angle, that's seen as a standard sort of safety, but also it's just a confidence thing. Whereas from the UK client perspective, it's, I'm not going to take my guys to a hotel where there's a security guard sitting on the outside on the floor, because all they're going to go is, are we susceptible to being, well, whatever words I'm going to use here, but are we susceptible to something going wrong? And that's that perception. So I think the starting point to sell Africa and some of these destinations is to understand what we and our clients will possibly be thinking, so you can then build that confidence from that starting point. And it is about, you can send pictures of we get various sort of from all over the world. You ask for a DMC for a presentation, countries, there's a few that we still haven't been to test, but many that we have. But you ask for presentations, and yes, when you're going to sort of Central Europe, you want to know about the 5-star deluxe, you want to know about the restaurants and the scenery. But when you're going to Africa or Asia or into Cambodia or into African destinations, you need to dive a bit deeper in what you're selling to us. It's just because it's just getting over that line, as Chris alluded to. It's about, it's not just scratching the surface, it's going deeper, and it's portraying the whole trip as a this is what we do, this is what we've got, this is the road transport system. I'm sure, without being detrimental to anywhere in the world, we've all got perceptions of a country, and we might expect it to be sort of battered roads and terrible transport and all that. Well, that might be wrong, but that's what we perceive it as, and that's what we think it is. So that's my advice or recommendation, is just and it's not just the UK, the US and all your other markets, they've all got perceptions. They won't be the same perception because we're all different, but find out what the perception is, and find out what's like as Robin said about Zimbabwe, find out why. When I suggest a group, I'm suggesting Zambia and I'm suggesting the Royal Livingstone, and I'm not suggesting Zimbabwe. Find out why that. It's not just me personally, but you know what I mean? Because that's that perception. And once that perception goes, the incentive houses do the fam trips, get people out there, show them what's there, the stuff that matters, and they will sell it. We sell what we believe. We don't sell to fill a spot. We don't sell we sell what we believe, and we sell what we like, and we sell what we know, and we sell what we trust, and we sell at the end of the day what we think, whether it's 50 people, 100 people, 200 people are going to come for 4 or 5 days and go, that's the best thing I've done this year. Thank you to my company for doing it. I'm going to work my socks off next year to be on the next one. That's what we sell. And so that's it's just perceptions. Get over the perceptions, then you've got a completely different level then.
Absolutely. And as you said, Graham, it's all about that first-hand experience. Is it not? It's that's why the fam trips are absolutely crucial. Yeah. And also, as Graham said, you know, a fam trip, it does not mean a jolly. It doesn't mean, you know, you get invited by the country's tourism bureau. A proper fam trip will be paid for in many ways, and you know, you always have to put your best foot forward.
I've got a little bugbear on fam trips, because I'm picky and choosy, and some I go and some I don't, and I go if I think I need to go, I want to see a destination. But fam trips to me aren't a jolly. I don't go away for 4 days on a jolly, because if I want to do that, I go with my family or my friends. I go away to learn personally, and I know this may sound a bit, but this is me. I go away to learn as much as I can about that destination for all different size groups. I've been on fam trips where we sat in this most beautiful restaurant with the best view of a cathedral behind me, talked about what's the maximum group, and the DMC said, oh, actually, to be fair, they don't do groups. They're just doing us a special today. And you go, well, why have you brought me here? Because I'm having lunch in a restaurant that I can't sell, and I'm only here to find things that I can believe in and sell. So when the destinations are putting together a fam trip, you're spending a lot of money on these. Your airlines, if you get them on board, your tourism board, your restaurants, all these restaurants are putting these great spreads on. But the fam trip to me needs to show off everything you can do with groups, different sizes, and don't make sure everyone has a great time, but don't worry about them having a holiday.
Absolutely.
Make sure you get as much out of your expense for them to learn. That's what I think a fam trip should be. Go there, fall in love with the destination, see 2 hotels you love, find some restaurants you love, paint a picture in your head, but don't come away and go, well, I didn't need a day off or an afternoon around the pool. I've achieved nothing for that. And I'm sorry if everybody else who likes that on fam trips goes, yeah, but I want to sit around the pool. Unfortunately, I like to go and find out. So when you're piecing together a fam trip, my advice would be think about you've got these people for 3 or 4 days in your life who are potentially your sales force for the next 10 years. You've got 3 or 4 days to give them as much ammunition from your destination, and make sure you piece it all together so that when they walk away, they go, I've got enough here for different size groups, but I've got enough, rather than just come away with a bit. That's my...
Absolutely. Now, 100%, Graham, thank you for that. And it's absolutely true. I mean, your fam trip needs to reflect the opportunities and potential of your destination. You can sleep on the plane on the way over and on the way back.
And also, sorry, Chris, last thing, if I may, the other thing is, for the DMC that's particularly putting it together, this is your 3-day showcase of your ability as a DMC. It's your ability to how you organize the whole 3 days or 4 days. It's how you put it together when you're planning a trip, the flow of it. This is your showcase. You're not just selling restaurants and bars and hotels. You're selling your services. So for the whole DMC, get your best people on site. Make sure it runs absolutely spot on, so that when I come back, I go, not only am I going to sell Uganda, but I'm definitely going to use Barbara's company because they're a great DMC. There's so much to gain from fam trips, but there's a lot to lose as well if it's not done right.
100%. You know, this is a workshop. So Barbara, if you've got any questions back at Graham, please feel free. 100%. And Chris also, so jump in at any time. I wanted to talk a little bit about the intra-region connectivity. But Barbara, like I say, if you've got questions back at Graham with all his years of experience, please go right ahead. So do you want to have a question?
I really just want to appreciate the straightforwardness with which they actually are telling what needs to happen, because indeed, I think where we have usually had a gap generally as DMCs in the African market has been the failure to understand the perceptions. So I'm hoping that Tess, at the end of this event, we can have some kind of small write-up that can give some ideas. You mentioned it's a workshop, so I think it would be good to get away with some learning points that we can use as DMCs in other Africa to try and help us better improve on our product, because I quite like the points that Graham mentions with regard to how to organize your farm trip, because indeed the perceptions strongly, if I might speak for Uganda, have always been, oh, if you actually can show that they have a security guard and they have a gun and they're moving around with a gun, then they'll feel safe. But yet a client is looking at it differently. I like the fact that he also quite clearly points out, because I think in the past we've also had a few people who haven't understood why they're really on a farm trip. They look at it more like a holiday. I like the fact that he understands that he actually comes on because he's looking to see what can he actually do. It's not just about taking him to my favorite restaurant. It's about, can he sell that restaurant?
I'm happy to go, Barbara, to your favorite restaurant. Don't you worry about that.
Why don't we all go?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I like the fact that I can get this kind of points. So for me, this is very good points that I'm learning to help myself put together a product that doesn't assume on behalf of the incentive house what they would want. Rather, I'd really be more interested in poking into what do they really think about it. What does the destination perceive about other Africa as we're seeing it? Because I think when we get that right, it helps us to, do a better job.
No, thank you,
Can I just
Barbara.
jump in?
Please, Chris.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that point and to Graham's points. And I mean, I don't think it makes any difference as to whether you're selling incentives or leisure travel. It's exactly the same. You've got to actually understand who your customer is and communicate effectively with them, because it is about what they're expecting, what their perceptions are, and what also makes them tick. A British traveller is very different from a German traveller, very different from a North American, an American traveller, Canadian traveller. They all have different personalities. They're all looking for different things out of their travel experience. So it's vitally important that you tailor what you're providing to their requirements. And on Graham's point about fam trips, absolutely vital. They've got to demonstrate exactly what it is that you're able to provide the end client. And you've got to be able to ignite conversations and questions. So if someone's saying, well, what if I want to do X, Y, and Z? Take a group to do, I don't know, some cultural drumming or something. Where can we do that? And you've got to be able to provide the answers in order to facilitate all of that.
Thank you, Chris. That's so true. Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, just one question that I have. I suppose it all depends on the sizes of the groups that you have. You find that a lot of the products we have in this market are really niche products, and you may find also limitation in terms of the sizes of the groups that can experience it. Take an example of the gorilla tourism. There's a limited number of people that can trek one particular family per day. The challenge has usually been with incentive trips is that they can't do more than 7 days. A safari can easily do 10 days or 21 days, but the incentives are really 5 to 7 days. So how do you look at your clients in terms of that? And you also earlier on quite mentioned the fact that it is an expensive product, because indeed the cost of the gorilla permit is quite expensive. In Rwanda, it's about 1,500, and in Uganda, it's just gone to $700. So that's quite a pricey, element of just one aspect of the whole trip. In terms of the groups that you hold, and looking at some of the regulations that we have for accessing some of these one-time experience activities like gorilla trekking, how do you see yourselves, working on an incentive that would cover a group that would really want to all see the gorillas, but they all can't see them at the same time because it's not possible for conservation reasons?
I think the gorilla experience is a tricky one, and rightly so, because it's limited and it's restricted, and it's got all the right measures in place, and you wouldn't want it to change from that. You wouldn't want to suddenly find 70 people trekking around one family just because you've got a group that size. So I hope to God that there's never any change on that, and that those restrictions still sort of stay in place. I think it's also very difficult because, in my opinion, when we do an incentive trip and there's an experience within that, of which there should be many, but a one-off, you want everyone. I love it when everyone shares it together, because on that day the temperature was the same, the weather was the same, they all had the same extraordinary. So the gorilla thing again becomes slightly limited, because again, if you do something over 4 or 5 days in pockets of 10, say it's a group of 50, the worst thing would be, and suddenly the weather's so bad on day 5 they don't do it. It's sometimes like Table Mountain, as we know, with the cloud cover there, you always try and do drinks on the first night. You might end up doing it on the third if it's cancelled off. But if everyone's doing that experience and it doesn't happen, sometimes it's just one of those things that the weather's stopped. But that's always my biggest fear, Barbara, is when you do an incentive group and you split the same experience over day, if something happened to one of those groups, that experience, and that's difficult. I don't know what the answer is. For me, when I talk about Rwanda and the gorillas, I set it as, if we've got a small exclusive group where you've got, I know in Rwanda it's 6s, and so we go, if we've got 12 or 18 people, we can do 3 lots of 6 on the same day. I would never sit in front of a client who's got a group of 100 and try and crowbar a group into it, because I wouldn't. I'd be lying to me and them if I tried. But I think you have to look at something like that. And if you've got a client who says, look, Graham, I've got $10,000 per head, which we all know is a huge budget for an incentive. But if I've got $10,000 a head and I've got 15 people who are my top performers, and I want to take them somewhere in the world to do something they'll never do again, that's the first thing I'm going to sit down and go, this is for you. If I've got a client who's got $3,000 a head for 100 people, I might tell them about the gorillas and show my photos, just because it shows that we're experienced of traveling the world, and it's great over a beer to show the videos of the, but I wouldn't talk about that. But I would talk about 50 people into South Africa, Kapama for safari. I would talk about bigger groups. So yeah, based on the restrictions that are in place, you're never going to be able to sell a big group in. It's an exclusive, big budget. And again, you've got to be honest. If a client says I've got $3,000, $4,000 or £3,000-4,000 a head, you're not going to do Rwanda, because you're going to be paying, you pay $700-800 a night for the 3-star. The wonderful Bishop's House is fantastic property, great fun. 3-star, $800. Then you've got the one and only Gorillas Nest, which I went and did a site inspection, $2,000 a night. Extraordinary. But you do that for 3 nights plus your gorillas, you've got $7,500 done before you've eaten or got there. So it's just about having, but that's where the knowledge comes in. That's where fam trips, experiences, our knowledge as an incentive house is what our clients pay us for, because they pay us to know what we're talking about, not to send 80 people to Uganda or Rwanda and then suddenly find that you can't do it because it's physically impossible. You just have to manage that, Barbara. You can't do big groups into the gorillas. It's just, and I hope you never can, because that means they've sort of sold out for the profit, which we never want to happen, sort of thing. So it's just,
well, we can do groups into the gorillas, but they would have to be split up into several.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's when people would come in, and it wouldn't be very exciting because not everybody will be having something uniform.
But sometimes the smaller the group is, the bigger the budget. We don't always get the big group with a massive budget. That's sometimes it. So it's there for conversation. I think it's there. It's the same as everything. Just going back to one thing that's been brought up today, and with the DMCs and us as an incentive house and all our competitors in the UK, it's amazing, because I've always said to everybody, we don't put Table Mountain there. We don't put the lions out in the reserves. We don't put the gorillas in the mountains. They're all there. Us and DMCs, our role is to make sure every single element of that experience falls into place. As in getting you there, the briefing, where's the briefing, what are we doing? And I think that's the whole thing about the DMC's role on even fam trips and everything else, is that seeing the gorillas is the highlight. Spending a day on a game drive is a highlight, but actually what matters is all the little bits that we all do in our industry to make sure the minute that guy or my clients and their guests arrive at Heathrow or Gatwick, and the minute they get back, that whole 4 or 5 days has been seamless. And that's so important to have that trust in DMC. So I think everything you guys put over to us has to be about your in-depth knowledge of everything that you can do to make it seamless, because that's what we're looking for. It's not the glossy pictures of elephants and rhinos and gorillas and mountains, because we know they're there. It's how you're going to work with us to make sure that our clients have the most seamless, beautiful, logistical, perfect experience.
I like perfective.
Perfectly.
That's the new word. Now, that was absolutely invaluable advice and input. Thank you, Graham. I hope that everybody's on this workshop listening in can take something away from that. And I cannot believe we're almost done with the hour. Chris, did you want to add anything before we close up?
All I'd like to say is that I think it's been a fascinating session, and it's obviously our focus is very much on leisure side. So for me, it's been very informative from the incentive side of the business. So it's very useful. I think Africa has got a huge amount of potential coming forwards. It is a wonderful destination. It got into my heart long time ago, and I think as travel starts to resume, coming out of the sort of locked down COVID world that we currently exist in, Africa ticks so many boxes. So I'm looking forward to a great recovery over the coming years.
Thank you, Chris. Barbara, a parting shot from you.
I just want to encourage Chris and Graham to, look a bit more at Uganda, because there's a lot that we can offer. And I'm happy to share some information just to help you get a bit more in-depth information about Uganda. And when you're ready to travel and to do a farm trip, we'll certainly be happy to work with you. And taking from your advice, I think it will be very valuable for us to have an opportunity to showcase what Uganda has to offer, so that in future, when you have some people asking about any other destinations that you can offer them, Uganda can actually come up top on your list.
Brilliant. So the new kid on the block, as I say, the other Africa. Barbara, it's been so wonderful to have you here and showcase your destination. And Graham, thank you ever so much for taking the time and spending, sharing your highly valuable advice. Any parting shot from you?
Firstly, nice to meet you all. It's been highly enjoyable. Barbara, feel free to connect after this and tell me all about Uganda. The more you tell me, the more I know, but we can have a proper chat at some point. I'm happy to listen. And that goes to all the other viewers and people that are watching this. You know where we are, Ulterior Events. We're always happy to listen. And say in Africa, I agree with Chris. I think that these traffic light system will change. It will change. We know it will change. And Africa as a whole has so much to offer the incentive world. I'm a champion of it, as you know, and we've gone through all that already. But it's just continue what you're doing. Continue painting the pictures of the incentive houses. Keep convincing them that what Africa's got to offer, everything, the beauty and the culture is there. Just keep convincing the incentive houses that the logistics and the infrastructure and all the stuff that matters when you're putting 100 people on the ground, 200 people on the ground is there. But I'll be back more and more times as soon as I can, and I wish everybody all the best. And this road to recovery will carry on, and we'll all come through it, and we'll all get back to doing what we do very, very well. And I can't wait.
Absolutely, all of us. Thank you, Graham, and then thank you to all our panelists today, to all our moderators, to Rudy for running things in the background. All the very best to everybody. And like I said, Africa is open for business, and let's hope we can actually do exactly that really soon. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, Tess.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.